Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the fanfiction guy. Back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Had the Smoke Quirk? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku first discovered his quirk on his 5th birthday. As he leaned forward to blow out the candles on his birthday cake, the thin, wispy trails of smoke moved away from him, forming a pattern and shifting in unison. The little 5-year-old stared at the white tendrils for a brief moment before narrowing his eyes in a remarkable display of focus for someone his age. To his mother's surprise and his delight, the smoke twisted and coiled into a ball above the All Might-themed cake. That night, there was a lot of crying in the Midoriya household. Izuku spent hours sitting in front of the small fireplace, playing with the dark smoke that swirled there. He sometimes got sooty and covered in ash, which exasperated his mother, but he never stopped playing with it. The quirk itself was rather weak, an unfortunate combination of flame breath and attraction of small objects. Rather than pyrokinesis or telekinesis, Izuku could only control a small, fist-sized ball of smoke. Even so, he loved it. He could create whatever shapes he desired, as long as they remained small enough to fit in his hand. He had perfect control over the amount of smoke he could manipulate and could even breathe it like air. That discovery had nearly given his mother a heart attack. Little Izuku was content with his quirk, but the other children were not. Children can be cruel, often driven by jealousy or pride, and they do their best to elevate themselves while bringing others down. 4-year-old Katsuki Bakugo was no exception. He discovered his own quirk 6 months after Izuku and was immediately elevated to the top of the social hierarchy. He could sweat a nitroglycerin-like substance and detonate it from his palms. Explosion. The perfect quirk for a hero. Katsuki's ego grew until he believed himself superior to everyone else, especially the useless Deku. What could a bit of smoke do against a villain? Make him cough? Make his eyes water? Who would support someone that weak when they could praise the kid with explosive hands? So, Izuku played alone, stealing the smoke from whatever adult was smoking near the park and retreating into the trees to play with his only friend, his quirk. Pathetic, right? 9 years later, Izuku was still friendless. He had made considerable progress with his powers, but everyone focused on the flashy, loud, abrasive underclassman Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku could perfectly control smoke contained within an area roughly his size. He had recently discovered he could change the smoke's color, which he found cool, even if he hadn't yet found a practical use for it. His quirk wasn't suited for battle. It could serve as a distraction or impair his enemy's vision, but it was a double-edged sword. He couldn't see through smoke any better than anyone else could. Trying to suffocate someone with it was a bad idea, as it could easily turn fatal, and Izuku did not want that on his conscience. So, he trained his body a little. He ran every morning and lifted light weights occasionally, but he wasn't muscular by any definition. Izuku had also looked up some martial arts online. It was a bit late to just pick one up, so he had memorized some basic moves, but he wasn't particularly skilled. He had been working on a super move for the entrance exam, but it was quite dangerous. Depending on the exam's nature, it might not even be a valid option. He had also solved the biggest problem of creating smoke to use his quirk effectively. He contacted a small support company that made technology for teenagers preparing for the hero course. They primarily focused on enhancing a quirk's output or dampening it if the user couldn't manage it manually. For Izuku, they created smoke devices that resembled cigarettes. They weren't real cigarettes, as they contained no tobacco or nicotine, but were designed to produce thick smoke quickly. He had requested this design for 2 reasons. It was amusing to see others' reactions to his smoking problem, and it disguised the fact that he couldn't produce smoke himself. A villain would see a cigarette and likely ignore it. It wouldn't be the hero's only method of attack. Once again, Inko nearly had a heart attack when Izuku showed her the box. She eventually agreed it was a good idea, but only after making him promise he wouldn't start smoking for real multiple times. Izuku took his seat near the back of the huge auditorium. Several classmates sat around him, snickering about the useless nerd trying to take the exam. Fortunately, the lights dimmed soon after he sat down, and a familiar figure walked on stage. Present Mike, with his quirk voice, greeted the audience energetically, asking if they were excited for the exam. The hall remained silent, but Izuku cheered internally. After addressing the crowd, Present Mike explained the practical exam. The written exam had already taken place earlier in the week, which many examinees were thankful for. The stress of both exams in one morning would have been overwhelming. Once the explanation concluded, Izuku sighed in relief. His pseudo-super move would be very useful during the exam, and the hours he had dedicated to training it would not be in vain. Izuku stepped off the bus, reaching into his pocket to pull out a pack of his smoke devices. He lit one and took a deep breath, blowing the smoke out and creating a ring around him. A few teens raised an eyebrow, but most were too busy psyching themselves up for the exam. He slipped the box and lighter back into his pocket, exhaling another stream of smoke. Each device burned slowly but produced several cubic meters of smoke, and he only needed one for the exam. When Present Mike shouted, "Start!" Izuku ran into the city, releasing thick black smoke. He turned a corner and came face to face with a two-pointer, running forward with his hands outstretched, gathering a fist-sized clump of black smoke. He began to compress it, ready for action. The small cloud became thinner until Izuku could only see a solid black circle suspended between his open palms. A bead of sweat rolled down the back of his neck as he sent it forward at high speed. He focused intently as he unleashed his ability, creating a monomolecular blade. The head of the robot fell to the ground with a dull clang, and Izuku continued onward. Cementos commented on the current batch of examinees, noting that while some were achieving high scores, their records were far from perfect. He expressed concern about the fighting among competitors over single robots. Nizu observed that arrogance seemed to be a common trait among them as they had been told throughout their lives that they were exceptional. Aizawa, surprised, noted that he had seen a student smoking during the exam. Nizu clarified that the cigarettes were not real, they were specially made to produce thick smoke without any addictive substances. He explained that Mr. Midoriya's quirk was a weak smoke control, but his performance indicated he had trained it far beyond expectations. Midnight expressed her surprise at the unconventional support equipment, while Aizawa pointed out that the first impression of the students would likely be that the boy was smoking, which could lead to misunderstandings. He questioned how much Midoriya had improved his quirk. Nizu explained that Midoriya had progressed from controlling fist-sized amounts of smoke at a young age to mastering his entire body's area by 14. His fine control allowed him to create monomolecular blades with impressive ease, far exceeding previous expectations. Mike acknowledged Midoriya's impressive skills, while Midnight found him adorable. Aizawa, however, remained skeptical, noting that while Midoriya was a standout by their standards, he still had to contend with many other strong competitors. Nizu suggested that it would be best to let Aizawa handle the situation with the students. Izuku had just cut off the head of his 21st robot, bringing his score to a respectable 43 points. He still had 3 minutes left in the exam, plenty of time to find more robots. Suddenly, an explosion echoed from the next street over, causing a wave of shock and confusion among the examinees. Izuku rushed into the main road, his focus shifting from finding robots to the towering robot that loomed before him. It was the largest robot he had ever seen, and many of his peers were either fleeing in panic or frozen in awe. Some were trapped by debris, and one boy was pinned to the ground. Determined, Izuku sprang into action. As he approached the classroom door, Izuku felt a mix of nerves and excitement. 2 of his classmates had also made it into the UA Hero course, both of whom were skilled and powerful. What surprised him most was that he had earned the highest score. His villain points alone would not have secured his admission, but his overwhelming rescue points had ensured his place. The 2-star students were not pleased with his success. Clenching his fist, Izuku took a deep breath and stepped through the door, only to be met with chaos. Students were using their quirks, jumping around the room, and generally causing a ruckus. In the corner, a caterpillar man caught his attention, and they locked eyes for a moment. Keeping his head down, Izuku tried to sneak to his desk at the front, but it didn't work. A familiar voice called out from behind him, joined by another. He heard comments questioning his legitimacy, suggesting he had cheated his way in. The caterpillar man interrupted, stating that he had only been there for 5 minutes and was disappointed that only one student had noticed him. He instructed everyone to put on their PE uniforms and get outside within 5 minutes. Aizawa, observing from the main building, mentally prepared excuses for the students he intended to expel. He was surprised when Midoriya noticed him and was the first to leave the classroom, displaying a determined look that pleased Aizawa. The majority of the class was late, which furthered Aizawa's plan for expulsion. He announced that they would be doing a quirk apprehension test, with the last place finisher facing expulsion. Izuku had already prepared his smoke after leaving the changing room, keeping it ready for use. The first test was a 50-meter dash. He inverted his monomolecular blade to push off the solid mass with his right foot, giving him a strong start. The second test focused on grip strength. Izuku employed the same technique as before, combining it with his physical strength to achieve a significantly better score than he would have otherwise. The endurance run, standing long jump, sit-ups, and sideways steps proceeded normally, as he lacked the control to utilize his quirk during those tests. The ball throw, however, went exceptionally well. Izuku launched the ball into a thick black cloud of smoke that became somewhat solid and carried the ball off into the distance. Maintaining the solid state proved challenging, but he managed to achieve a distance of 2,300 meters before losing control and letting the ball drop. Once his classmates completed their throws, Aizawa called the students over to announce their scores. Izuku's gaze fell down the hologram until he found his own name 19th place. He had barely beaten the student in last place, whom he did not recognize. The difference was only a few points, which was incredibly close. He realized he needed to work harder to avoid such tight margins in the future. Then, Aizawa surprised him with an unexpected announcement. He instructed all the students to pack their bags and leave, stating they were expelled from the hero course. Ignoring the cries of outrage, he added that they could attempt to transfer to general education, though it was unlikely. He warned them to vacate the campus in 5 minutes, emphasizing that the consequences for being late would be worse than expulsion. He then told Izuku to stay behind. After a few moments of loud protests from the other students, Aizawa glanced at his wrist. He informed them that they had 4 minutes and 36 seconds before he could legally arrest them for trespassing, which would prevent them from ever becoming heroes at any hero school. The students cleared out quickly after that. Once they were out of sight, Aizawa turned to Izuku and revealed that he was not expelled. He was the only one who had truly put effort into the test. Aizawa instructed him to change back into his uniform and mentioned that his syllabus was on the desk. Izuku stared at Aizawa for a moment, then asked why he was the only one allowed to remain in the course. Aizawa raised an eyebrow and prompted him to clarify. Izuku tilted his head, pondering his words. He questioned why Aizawa would keep only him when many of his classmates had impressive quirks, and if they had passed the exams, they must possess skill. Aizawa explained that the other students exhibited laziness, arrogance, and pride. While their quirks were powerful, they had not bothered to train or improve them. Once they reached a level that made them top performers in junior school, they stopped striving for improvement and simply maintained their status. Izuku nodded hesitantly, beginning to understand Aizawa's perspective. He argued that just because they were a bit arrogant didn't mean they couldn't become heroes. Aizawa responded by comparing the students to those who were given swords, spears, and shields at birth, while Izuku was given a rock. The others were satisfied with their swords and did not attempt to forge something better. In contrast, Izuku had taken his rock and somehow forged Excalibur. Izuku was taken aback by the analogy. Aizawa smiled slightly and continued, noting that he had seen Izuku's file, and so had all the staff. What Izuku had accomplished with his quirk had impressed every hero in the building. He pointed to the main UA building and highlighted that Izuku had created a monomolecular blade from scratch using a smoke control quirk. Aizawa noted that while Izuku's classmates used their quirks in the same way they always had, Izuku had essentially reinvented his quirk to meet his needs. This adaptability was precisely what they sought in potential heroes. Aizawa gave Izuku a reassuring pat on the shoulder as he passed by, telling him to make sure to get his syllabus but that he was free to go. He encouraged Izuku to take a long nap, as they would be sharpening Excalibur all morning, which would be quite challenging. As Aizawa walked away, he couldn't hide his grin at Izuku's enthusiastic response. Later, Midnight asked Aizawa if he had any students left for her to teach art. Aizawa yawned and mentioned that he only had one student remaining Midoriya. He had managed to expel the other 19 before the end of the apprehension test. Cementos grumbled, handing 100 yen to present Mike. Midnight expressed her excitement, stating that teaching one-on-one was much better than a full class. She could tailor the lesson plan to Izuku's specific progress, which thrilled her. Aizawa rolled his eyes, laying back under his desk and snuggling into his sleeping bag, confident that Izuku would make a great hero. Izuku entered homeroom and paused, staring at the single desk directly in front of the teacher's desk. He approached and sat down, taking in the sparse classroom in disbelief. It still hadn't fully registered that he had survived Mr. Aizawa's purge. When the bell rang, Mr. Aizawa emerged from under the teacher's desk in his usual manner. He instructed Izuku to change into his PE clothes and meet him in Training Hall C, the second one to the left of the main stairs, as Hall A was closed due to the third years. Izuku looked around Training Hall C, noticing the weights and secured bars around the room, along with several dark blue mats arranged in the center. Mr. Aizawa stood beside a large bundle on the floor and called Izuku over. He informed him that they would be working on solidifying his smoke constructs. Aizawa acknowledged that Izuku could create shapes and mimic the appearance of objects. Izuku confirmed that while shaping the smoke was easy, solidifying more complex designs or multiple objects was challenging. Aizawa nodded, understanding the situation. He explained that Izuku had used his quirk for the ball throw and grip test but not for the sideways steps. He instructed Izuku to focus on consistently solidifying one shape to a decent degree before progressing to two objects and eventually more complex shapes. As Izuku prepared to practice, Aizawa pulled a long stick from the bundle at his feet and held it out toward Izuku. He instructed him to focus on creating singular walls to block his attack without damaging the stick. Izuku nodded, raising his hands to form a thick wall between himself and Aizawa. Thinner, 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 Aizawa instructed, moving the wooden post forward and smashing through the wall with a sound reminiscent of shattering glass. The chunks of smoke dissolved back into wispy clouds. A good first attempt. Try again. If it's too thick, the entire structure is weak. If it's too thin, there isn't any weight behind the wall. Izuku tried again and again, but each time, Aizawa smashed through the wall effortlessly. They spent hours in the training room repeating the same exercise. Eventually, Aizawa called an end to the session. You have English in 30 minutes. Take a shower, grab something to eat, and head back to the classroom. You did well today. Izuku sighed, feeling dejected. He thought about how every wall he created had been taken down in one hit. Did Endeavor learn how to not burn his opponents to ashes in a matter of hours? Aizawa raised an eyebrow. Izuku shook his head as he picked up his bag. Exactly. Skip homeroom tomorrow and come straight here once you're in your gym clothes. We'll get an extra half hour that way, Aizawa called as Izuku left. He glanced down at the tablet in his hands. First hit, 24.5 N. Final hit, 562.9 N. Aizawa grinned. You'll be stopping full-strength punches with those walls by this time next week. We'll be moving on to complex shapes sooner than I thought. UA's curriculum was quite enjoyable. The subjects were engaging, and the teachers, all pro heroes, were impressive except for Aizawa's rigorous training. Every day, without fail, Izuku met Aizawa in one of the training halls or testing grounds. They would do basic exercises, run laps around the main building, lift weights for about half an hour, and then endure intense quirk training for several hours before English class. The routine was repetitive, with Izuku putting up a wall and Aizawa smashing it down. One day, Aizawa brought in a robot. Sir, why is there a robot here? Izuku asked. Put up a shield between us and the robot, and I'll show you, Aizawa replied, hefting the wooden pole. Izuku created a wall and glanced expectantly at his teacher. Aizawa swung the post at the wall, and to Izuku's surprise, it bounced right off. I no longer possess the strength to break through your smoke walls, Aizawa stated simply. Izuku stared at the intact wall of black, then back at Aizawa, bewildered. Didn't I tell you? I've been putting more strength into my attacks every session. Because you kept failing, you worked harder than before to get it right. Congratulations, you've created a nearly impenetrable shield unless your opponent has a strength quirk, is a massive bodybuilder, is really determined, or has a gas quirk like Midnight. Let's get started. From that point on, the training became even more challenging. They added more exercises in the morning, heavier weights, stronger robots, longer runs, and increased the total volume of smoke under Izuku's control. Izuku was loving it. The robot smashed through Izuku's smoke wall again, scattering the black wisps everywhere. He sighed and accepted the water bottle Aizawa offered. There's something I'm missing. You shouldn't just be able to smash through solid objects like that. Once I figure out what I'm doing wrong, I should be able to stop any attack with little effort, he muttered. We have to pack up for now. Today, you'll be having your first actual heroics lesson. Get your costume on and head out to the bus bay. We're going to a special facility for rescue training. Izuku sighed and got to his feet. All right, I'll think on it when I get home. His costume was simple, a dark green, almost black jumpsuit with small black exhaust ports at various places around his body. These ports allowed him to release smoke for maximum effect, especially useful now that he could create punch-resistant shields with a single thought. Theoretically, he could also stop bullets, but he wasn't eager to test that theory until he figured out what he was missing. He wore a black utility belt with 2 emergency medical kits, a few rolls of capture tape, some useful items, and a mask that connected to the exhausts. It was a plain rebreather that covered his mouth and nose, which he could hang around his neck if needed. Izuku met Aizawa outside, and they boarded the bus for a 15-minute drive to the special rescue training facility. Upon arrival, they were greeted by the rescue hero 13 outside a large dome. Good morning, Mr. Midoriya. I've been hearing great things about you from my colleagues. Welcome to the USJ, a facility designed to simulate the most common disasters a hero will face. Please come inside. 13 exclaimed. The 3 entered the facility and stopped at the top of a large staircase leading to the central plaza below. Izuku looked around in awe at the expansive dome. There was a lake, a mountain, a pair of separate domes painted with flames and blue waves, a crumbling city, and a rocky outcrop. Floods, fires, storms, landslides, and earthquakes. These are just some of the scenarios you will encounter in your career. I'm sure Eraserhead has been teaching you how to wield your quirk offensively. Well, with me, you will learn how to use your quirk to save people from disasters like these. Follow me. 13 exclaimed. They descended the stairs and headed toward the crumbling cityscape, moving to the center of the zone where several roads intersected. Welcome to the earthquake zone. This is possibly the most common disaster you will face an earthquake in or around a populated area. These buildings are designed to be unstable, so we need to be cautious. However, most of them can only collapse if triggered by the facility's main computer. Izuku followed 13 into the nearest building, Aizawa right behind him. The rescue hero led them upstairs to an open room with large cracks running along the floor, walls, and ceiling. On the other side of the room was a training dummy slumped against the wall. You see the cracks around the room? Unless you can fly, it's too dangerous to try to rescue the civilian in this situation. The floor needed support from underneath, or the cracks had to be repaired by someone with a specialized quirk. As long as they waited and didn't disturb the building, the civilian would remain safe until they could rescue them without concern. Izuku recalled Newton's first law of motion. Izuku realized that his quirk negated Newton's third law. This explained why the robot could easily punch through his smoke. He murmured to himself that he had figured it out. Aizawa raised an eyebrow, curious about what Izuku had discovered. Izuku explained that his quirk negated the third law of motion, which allowed others to break through his solidified smoke without receiving an equal amount of force in return. He noted that as his quirk strength increased, Aizawa and the robot needed more force to break through his barriers. If he could mimic the effects of Newton's third law with his quirk, it could change everything. Izuku pressed a button on his suit, releasing smoke through the exhaust pipes. The smoke filled the room, seeping into the cracks in the walls, floor, and ceiling. With a single thought, he hardened the smoke, securing the room perfectly. He carefully walked across the room, picked up the dummy, and returned to the two heroes. Izawa grinned, congratulating him on graduating to shape training. The rest of the lesson with 13 was highly informative. She enthusiastically taught him how to identify unstable infrastructure, recognize load-bearing structures, and other valuable tips for rescue work in precarious buildings. Izuku would have one rescue lesson each week, moving to a new zone in a repeating loop, completing mock rescue missions that grew increasingly complex and risky. Meanwhile, Aizawa's training sessions had intensified in preparation for the upcoming sports festival. Although Izuku had learned to create nearly indestructible 2D shields, he struggled with three-dimensional shapes. Simple spheres turned out lumpy, cubes were misshapen, and his attempts at pyramids were less than satisfactory. Creating 3D structures was challenging, and there was no missing law of physics to provide a shortcut this time. Practice was essential. He could create shapes with smoke, but when he tried to solidify them, he lost control, resulting in imperfect forms. In addition to creating 3D structures, Aizawa was teaching Izuku basic hand-to-hand combat. He learned how to throw and take a punch, as well as how to position himself against strong winds. Izuku realized that his previous online martial arts training had been insufficient. He began to appreciate the taste of fresh air during the few moments he wasn't on the sweaty training mat. He was improving, with his shapes becoming less lumpy, though still as fragile as his earlier walls. He had gained some muscle and, while his hand-to-hand skills were still lacking, they were likely better than most first-year students. Aizawa noted that Izuku was a quick learner. Finally, the day of the festival arrived. Izuku checked his pocket for the 10th time to ensure his cigarettes were there. The crowd in the stadium above roared as Present Mic's voice boomed, asking if everyone was ready. The audience responded with a loud, yes. Izuku stood up and left the waiting room, checking again for his lighter. Present Mic announced that the first participant was Izuku Midoriya, the sole student of the Hero course and survivor of the Class 1A Purge. As he walked into the stadium alone, he surveyed the large circular arena. The audience appeared confused by the absence of other Hero course students but cheered nonetheless. Present Mic introduced the General Studies classes, followed by the Support course classes, emphasizing their potential as future heroes. Classes 1I and 1J, the business classes, would not be participating and had chosen to observe from the stands. Present Mic then called Cementos to the stage. The soft-spoken teacher requested Izuku to come up and deliver the first-year representative speech. Izuku stepped up, wishing his fellow first-years the best of luck and expressing hope that the general education students aiming for the Hero course could perform better. He concluded with a spirited, plus ultra. As Izuku returned to his place, Cementos thanked him and announced that the first event would be a game of hide-and-seek tag. The rules were explained. One staff member would be IT, without using their quirk but could use support equipment. The students had to run and hide within the building, with the final 42 to be caught moving on to the next round. If any students evaded capture for longer than half an hour, they would also advance. The staff member would wear a body cam for fairness. Izuku watched as Mr. Aizawa emerged from the tunnel on the other side of the arena and climbed onto the stage. Their eyes met, and Aizawa smiled. Izuku felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. As soon as the buzzer rang, Izuku turned and dashed back into the tunnel he had just exited. The students had a 30-second head start, which Izuku intended to use wisely. He sprinted down corridors and up staircases, moving swiftly the entire way. He ducked through a doorway, inhaling the smoke that surrounded him and filling his lungs. He discarded the cigarette butt into a nearby bin and entered the stands, panting heavily. The audience members in his section glanced at him briefly before returning their attention to Aizawa and Cementos below. When the second buzzer sounded, Aizawa sprinted across the arena and into the tunnel most of the first years had used. Izuku approached the railing at the front of the stands, leaning against it for a moment while watching the tunnel. When Aizawa didn't reappear immediately, Izuku exhaled a thick cloud of smoke, forming a solid platform on the other side of the railing. He jumped over the metal bars and landed on his construction, which rose to the top of the stadium, allowing him to step onto the roof of the arena. He settled cross-legged and observed as Aizawa searched the stadium, checking bathrooms, waiting rooms, and the audience stands. One student from General Studies was caught in present mix booth behind a door, using his capture weapon to ensnare students and propel himself around the building. Present Mike announced that there was only one student left and 3 minutes remaining on the clock, questioning where the first-year hero student could be hiding. Aizawa soon caught a support student sitting among the crowd, wearing a poncho. Izuku had relaxed slightly until Aizawa used his capture weapon to pull himself onto the stadium roof. Aizawa addressed him as problem child. Izuku greeted his homeroom teacher with a grin, noting that it took Aizawa a while to find him. The man smiled back, already sending his capture weapon toward his only student. Izuku exhaled a significant amount of smoke, solidifying it instantly to block the capture scarf. Undeterred, Aizawa reeled in his scarf and charged toward Izuku. Izuku released all the smoke from his lungs, creating a wall several meters tall and spanning the width of the roof, leaving a narrow opening at eye level to keep an eye on Aizawa. Aizawa kicked the wall with all his strength, but it held firm. He complimented Izuku on his improvement over the past month, stating that nothing short of all might could breach the wall. Izuku playfully declared that he accepted Aizawa's surrender. Aizawa retorted that he wasn't giving up and jumped off the roof, swinging below and reappearing on the other side of the wall. Izuku jumped back, dodging Aizawa's capture weapon again and ensnaring it in formless smoke, solidifying it around the tool. Aizawa quickly drew his knife and cut away the portion of the capture weapon trapped in smoke. By the time he turned to where Izuku had run, a large black cloud swirled on the roof, obscuring his vision. The final buzzer sounded, marking the end of the event, and the audience erupted in cheers. Present Mike announced that Izuku Midoriya was once again the sole survivor of Eraserhead's challenge and would advance to the next event. Aizawa approached the dissipating vortex of black smoke, finding Izuku inhaling the smoke back into his body. Aizawa praised Izuku for his performance, noting that he would need to increase the intensity of his training. Izuku mockingly sagged, walking over to meet the hero and apologizing for the damage to his capture weapon, admitting he hadn't expected Aizawa to actually cut it. Aizawa reassured him that it was fine, as he had spares and the weapon was designed to be easily repaired. They reached the edge of the rooftop, and Aizawa admitted he didn't have a way down. Izuku exhaled a puff of smoke, forming a wide platform from it. Aizawa playfully nudged Izuku, leaning him toward the edge, teasing about showing him a short drop. After a brief intermission, the 42 students who passed were gathered back in the center of the arena, awaiting Cementas's announcement for the second event. Cementas declared that the second event would be team dodgeball. The students would be split into 2 teams, with team assignments already determined. Each student had been assigned a point value based on the order in which they were caught by Eraserhead in the previous round. Hitting the student in 42nd place with a ball would earn 5 points, while if that student caught a ball, they would deduct 5 points from the opponent's score. Points would increase in increments of 5, with the first-place student worth 10,000 points. Everyone's gaze immediately locked onto Izuku. Inko was having a good day. So far, she had only cried twice while watching her son on TV, and he hadn't been hurt yet. She felt immense pride for Izuku. Other children had always teased him for his weak quirk, and the doctor had said it probably wouldn't get much stronger. But just look at him. He was soaring around the stadium, creating solid walls from smoke and confidently facing a pro hero. Inko glanced at her phone as it buzzed with a message. Inko texted that they should really change their names. Bichsuki replied, questioning where the fun would be in that. Bichsuki then messaged that Izuku was doing well, suggesting that the brat could learn a thing or 2 from him. Inko expressed her pride in Izuku's performance, while Bichsuki noted his impressive control, turning smoke into solid objects and marveling at the skill required to do so. Inko mentioned that Mr. Aizawa was Izuku's homeroom teacher and had been tutoring him one-on-one to improve his quirk and fitness. Bichsuki remarked that they seemed familiar with each other during their rooftop encounter. Inko announced that the second event was starting, and Bichsuki commented that everyone would be aiming for Izuku now. Inko cheered for her son, and Bichsuki encouraged him enthusiastically. Izuku stood with a ball in hand, his gaze focused on the opposing team. Most of the students glared at him, hefting their dodgeballs in a threatening manner. Each student had one dodgeball, totaling 42 ball in play. Izuku had never attempted to separate and control that many pieces of smoke at once, but he was determined to manage. The buzzer rang out, signaling the start of the game. Smoke billowed across the arena, filling the dodgeballs through the usual air pump. With a single thought, Izuku sent every ball in the arena towards the opposing team. The bright red ball bounced off the teenagers and straight back into the hands of his teammates. The remaining ball floated in the air as Izuku grimaced, struggling to maintain control over all 42 objects. Present Mike announced that Midoriya had executed an instant attack, awarding his team 234 points in one move. As his teammates continued to launch volleys at the opposing team, Izuku eventually had to release the smoke within the ball, as the sheer number of objects exhausted him. The opposing team began to retaliate, focusing their efforts on Izuku, who gathered the remaining smoke around him to form a protective wall. The ball bounced harmlessly off. The second event lasted for 15 minutes. The red team put up a good fight, but thanks to Izuku's initial attack, the green team emerged victorious. The final round of the sports festival was always a tournament. Miro had not performed well in the tournament the previous year, but he was confident that this time he would avoid any embarrassing moments on live TV. Tamaki had not even made it last year due to his lack of aggression. Nijire had defeated her first opponent but lost to her second. Among the three of them, she had shown the most improvement, next to Miro's control issues. The 3 second years watched the first-year tournament, surprised to find only one student in the first-year hero course. They were even more astonished when he managed to fend off Mr. Aizawa with apparent ease. Admittedly, the man could not use his quirk, but the first year had adapted his strategy effectively, taking down the experienced pro with minimal effort. Miro noted that the first year's quirk was not particularly strong, similar to his own. He had made it powerful through training. He marveled at how the first year was creating solid objects from smoke and considered the amount of training required to reach that level. Tamaki remained silent, watching the 2 first years fight below with keen interest. Midoriya used smoke to blind his opponent, allowing him to maneuver behind him. Eventually, the green-haired boy tossed his opponent out of bounds. Tamaki observed that Midoriya's technique was unrefined. He was not merely pushing his opponents out of bounds. The smoke was too unstable for that. Perhaps he was too fatigued to concentrate fully. He speculated about the source of the smoke, questioning whether Midoriya produced it himself or if he had a different method. Miro asked how Tamaki could tell that Midoriya was not producing the smoke. Tamaki explained that after each event, Midoriya inhaled the smoke back in, never allowing it to drift away if he could help it. Miro pondered whether Midoriya would be open to sparring sometime. The tournament was progressing well. Izuku had exhausted more than half of the smoke in his lungs, but only 2 matches remained, both against general education students aiming for the hero course. One possessed a heat-based quirk, while the other 2 were unknown to him. He was set to face the heat user first. Before his match, he left the empty Class 1A seating area and entered the waiting room, where he took a moment to breathe out a thin haze of smoke. Holding it in his lungs throughout the day had been tiring, but it felt good to release it even briefly. When summoned to the arena, he inhaled all the smoke and extinguished his cigarette, tossing it into the bin beside the door. Izuku stepped onto the concrete platform that served as the fighting ring. The announcer introduced the match, presenting Tetsubata Shota of Class 1D against Midoriya Izuku of Class 1A. The crowd was eager to see if the fiery fist could defeat the smoky strategist. Izuku bowed to his opponent, who appeared nervous. Both had made it this far, but Izuku, as the sole member of the hero course, was not expected to lose. The match began, and Izuku sprang into action, sprinting toward Tetsubata while releasing a small stream of smoke that enveloped him like a protective shroud. Tetsubata raised his arms defensively, establishing a solid stance, indicating he had some martial arts training. Izuku sent a ball of smoke toward him, anticipating movement. Tetsubata ducked, which worked in Izuku's favor, maintaining the distance between them. Izuku's fist collided with Tetsubata's forearm. The other boy attempted to grab Izuku, but the green-haired boy twisted away, blowing a gust of smoke into Tetsubata's face. The boy closed his eyes and coughed, shielding his face with his hands. Seizing the opportunity, Izuku grabbed Tetsubata's arm and swept his feet out from under him, pinning him to the ground. The announcer declared that Tetsubata was unable to move, allowing Midoriya to advance to the finals. Izuku approached the concrete ring for the final match. The excitement in the arena was palpable as the announcer hyped the event, introducing Midoriya Izuku against Akane Mitsa. Akane nodded curtly at Izuku, who returned the gesture. The match began with Izuku releasing a long puff of smoke. Akane had yet to reveal her quirk, or at least not in a way that Izuku could discern. She pulled her arm back as if preparing to punch, suggesting a strength-based quirk. Her fist shot towards him at high speed, and Izuku swiftly dodged, realizing she had spring-loaded fists and stretchy arms. So she hadn't relied on a reflex quirk during her previous fights, she was simply that skilled. Izuku attempted to create smoke walls to keep her at bay, but her fists were too swift, breaking through the smoke before he could solidify it. Her wrists stretched from where she was pinned against the wall, delivering powerful punches. After a few minutes, Izuku realized that close combat was his only option. He couldn't risk interfering with her arms, as he had yet to discover their limits. Staying at a distance only gave her the upper hand. Ultimately, it would come down to who was better in hand-to-hand combat and how clever Izuku could be with his quirk. In mere seconds, the arena was engulfed in dark smoke, obscuring everyone's view. Akane swung her fists wildly, anticipating a sneak attack. A figure emerged from the darkness, only to vanish upon contact with her strikes. The smoke solidified around her arms, creeping up to her shoulders and stopping there. Akane sighed as the smoke swirled around her. She declared her surrender, unable to move her arms. Present Mike announced the outcome with enthusiasm, proclaiming that Izuku Midoriya had won the sports festival. Izuku sat at his desk, the golden medal still hanging around his neck. Moments later, Mr. Aizawa entered, smiling at the young hero. He complimented Izuku on his performance, expressing his surprise at how well he had held off until the end of the match. Izuku beamed with pride, and Aizawa remarked that he could no longer afford to take it easy on him. Izuku eagerly anticipated the challenge. Aizawa glanced at the papers on his desk and explained that, although he usually distributed them the day after the festival, the influx of offers warranted an early start. He handed Izuku a large stack of papers detailing hero agencies that had requested him for a work study, organized by rating. Izuku flipped through a few pages before asking how many offers there were. Aizawa informed him that there were 5,286 in that pile alone, with more arriving even as he printed them. He instructed Izuku to look at the bottom page. Izuku picked up the stack and turned it over, taking the top page that featured a single hero's name. He expressed his honor at the opportunity with a mock bow, prompting Aizawa to roll his eyes. Aizawa warned him about the toll on his sleep schedule but acknowledged that it was the best option. Izuku felt confident, knowing Aizawa's teaching style and understanding of his strengths and weaknesses. Aizawa smirked, approving of Izuku's choice. He told him to go home, rest, and return in the morning, as he would be selecting his hero name then. Izuku eagerly announced his choice, the smoke hero, Wisp. Aizawa grinned, knowing that Midnight might not be pleased, but he welcomed the opportunity for more training. He noted that Izuku's hand-to-hand skills against Akane and the other general education students needed improvement and that he would work on that before their patrols. True to his word, Aizawa helped Izuku enhance his hand-to-hand combat skills in the short time they had together. Izuku also managed to solidify and maintain a three-dimensional shape. Although it was just a sphere, the simplest of the three tasks, it was still a fragile and slightly lumpy creation that had nearly overwhelmed him, but it was progress nonetheless. A week after the sports festival, Izuku and Aizawa set out on their first patrol together. The dynamics of daylight heroics were well known, as civilians were always present during villain confrontations. In contrast, underground heroics remained largely unknown except to the criminals and victims involved. During the quiet hours between incidents, Aizawa taught Izuku how to move silently, blend into the shadows, identify good perches, and tail someone without being detected. He also instructed him on what to look for in suspicious or guilty passers-by. If someone walked through an alley at night without fear, they were either reckless or had the means to defend themselves, likely indicating gang involvement or criminal activity. Engaging with random street thugs provided valuable practice, as facing the same opponent repeatedly could lead to bad habits. Thus, a new weekly schedule was established. Wake up at 6, engage in morning training, have breakfast, complete homework from the previous night's patrol, attend school, participate in quirk and weight training, spar, learn about paperwork and daylight heroics from UA staff while Izuku rested, return home at 4, nap until 6, have dinner, patrol until 2, sleep until 6, and repeat. Fortunately, patrols were relatively quiet, with only the occasional petty thief or drag deal to address. Izuku reassured Izuku that this was typical, so he didn't question the lack of activity. He explained that Saturdays were usually when more significant incidents occurred, as criminals had time off from their low-paying jobs and could gather for larger operations, such as territory disputes. Wisp perched on a rooftop beside Izuku, both remaining vigilant yet relaxed. Suddenly, a loud shout echoed from several alleyways away, followed by the sound of something crashing against a wall. Wisp exchanged a glance with Izuku, who nodded in encouragement. Without hesitation, Wisp activated the exhausts in his heels, releasing a small cloud of smoke that propelled him forward as he dashed across the rooftop, leaping off the edge. Izuku used his scarf to latch onto a fire escape, pulling himself onto the adjacent roof. Wisp executed a double jump off his smoke, landing on the opposite rooftop and racing toward the source of the commotion. This technique was an improved version of what he had used during the sports festival to reach the stadium roof, now more stable and capable of propelling him forward with explosive bursts of condensed smoke. He called it a smoke grenade. Wisp practically flew through the air, leaping off rooftops ahead of Eraserhead and quickly arriving at the scene. A creature with an exposed brain was attacking a burly-looking man. The creature's eyes were unfocused, rolling around vacantly. Behind the burly man was a wall of purple mist, which the creature was trying to push him into. However, the man stood firm, seemingly unaffected by the creature's punches. Wisp dropped from the roof, landing behind the brain creature. A torrent of smoke surrounded both the creature and the man, forming a solid shield between them. Wisp ordered for the situation to stop. The creature turned, letting out a garbled screech before charging at the smoke wall, smashing through it effortlessly and running into the purple mist. As soon as it passed through, the mist vanished without a trace. Wisp turned to the civilian just as Eraserhead arrived 6 seconds later. He asked if the man was all right. The burly man nodded, explaining that his quirk had absorbed the impact of the creature's punches and that he was grateful someone had heard his shouting, as he would have reached his limit soon. Eraserhead inquired about what had happened. The man shrugged, recounting how he had been walking when the purple portal had spat out the brain monster in front of him. He described the creature's strength, likening it to someone with a powerful quirk. He noted that Wisp had appeared behind the creature and created a wall, prompting the monster to retreat back to the portal. Eraserhead turned to Wisp, who explained that he had used a full-strength shield, but the creature had simply run through it as if it were not there. Eraserhead frowned, realizing that Wisp's walls should have stopped almost anything else, but the brain creature had walked through without hesitation. After the police questioned the man and took the hero's statements, Wisp and Eraserhead left the scene, heading back to UA. Izuku stumbled into homeroom, still a bit tired from the previous night's patrol. It hadn't been as eventful as a few nights ago, but he had been up until 2 a.m. running around on rooftops. Mr. Izuku greeted him from his desk as Izuku slumped down at his own. Izuku placed a mug on Izuku's desk, mentioning that the coffee would kick in soon. Izuku expressed his gratitude and quickly drank the hot liquid. Izuku informed the class that their end-of-term exams were approaching, giving them 2 weeks to prepare for both the written and physical components. He mentioned that training would be intensified, and sparring would be taken over by someone else, hinting that the exam might be more challenging than usual. Izuku was ready for the challenge. Once the coffee kicked in, Izuku and Izuku headed to Gym A, which had recently been repaired. They went through their usual morning exercises and quirk training for a few hours before getting food from the canteen. Aizawa instructed Izuku to put on his costume and head to practice facility. Izuku nodded, finishing his katsudon and returning the bowl to lunch rush, complimenting his cooking once again. After changing into his costume, Izuku walked over to practice facility 2, aware that Aizawa would likely have whoever was inside attack on sight. He surrounded himself in a vortex of smoke and knocked on the door. A cheerful feminine voice invited him in. Upon entering, Izuku noticed Aizawa in the corner, resting in his sleeping bag with his eyes closed. In the center of the room stood a girl with periwinkle blue hair, wearing a skin-tight blue bodysuit adorned with spiral patterns, likely related to her quirk. Beside her was a taller boy hunched over, cloaked and trembling, with numerous pouches attached to his outfit. Both hero students appeared to be around Izuku's age but were likely upperclassmen. Suddenly, Izuku felt his smoke move without his input, and a humanoid figure began to rise from the ground behind him. The figure, holding its breath, was dressed in a hero costume with a cape. It extended its fist toward Izuku but met a wall of smoke instead. There was a loud bang followed by an ouch as the figure sank back into the ground. Izuku condensed the smoke around him into his costume's exhaust pipes, preparing for any further attacks. A muscular blonde boy emerged from the ground a few meters away, cradling his fist. He exclaimed in excitement, noting that the cloaked boy, Tamaki, had witnessed the encounter. Tamaki quietly expressed a desire to go home. Mirio, the blonde boy, stood up and shook his hand before turning to Izuku with a big smile. He admitted to getting a bit too eager and asked how Izuku had noticed him. Izuku scratched the back of his neck, explaining that he could feel where the smoke he controlled was. By phasing out of the ground, Mirio had displaced the smoke, allowing Izuku to sense his presence. Mirio was impressed, noting how much Izuku had improved his quirk since the sports festival just 2 weeks prior. The girl, excitedly bouncing forward, expressed her enthusiasm for seeing the first-year student who had survived Aizawa's purge and asked about Izuku's quirk and how it worked. That was super impressive. Izuku was asked if he had fought Mr. Aizawa before and if he had won, as well as whether he had used his quirk or relied on hand-to-hand combat. Mirio attempted to slow down the barrage of questions, but Izuku took a moment before responding. He explained that his quirk was called smoke control, which allowed him to manipulate smoke. He had fought Mr. Aizawa, who had taught him how to fight, as their schedules often aligned. Although he hadn't won yet, he felt he was getting closer, even if Mr. Aizawa sometimes kicked it up a notch. They had sparred using both hand-to-hand combat and quirks, often combining the two. He then inquired about Nijire's quirk, guessing it had something to do with spirals and energy manipulation. Everyone stared at him for a moment, even Tamaki, who peeked out from his hood, and Aizawa, who opened his eyes slightly. Nijire beamed with excitement, bouncing on the spot, while Mirio laughed heartily. Tamaki pulled his hood back down, hiding a small smile, and Aizawa muttered something about there being 2 of them before returning to sleep. Nijire introduced her quirk, Surge, which used her stamina to create spiral energy blasts. She explained that she only used about 20% at a time due to its high stamina consumption, but she was improving. She could even fly by shooting energy from her feet. She floated over to Izuku, introducing herself as Nijire Hadu, her hero name being the same. Mirio then approached and offered a firm handshake, introducing himself as Mirio Togata, or Lemillion, as he aimed to save that many people. He explained his quirk, permeation, which allowed him to phase through anything. He gestured to Tamaki, who still had his hood over his face, and introduced him as Sun Eater, mentioning that Tamaki would have to explain his cool quirk himself, as he was being a bit shy. Tamaki quietly revealed that his quirk allowed him to manifest things he had eaten somewhere on his body, such as wings if he had eaten chicken. That was all he would say before retreating back into his hood. Mirio clapped Izuku on the shoulder, suggesting they all spar together to prepare for an upcoming exam. Izuku hesitated, unsure why they would want to spar with him since he was just a first-year student and felt he wouldn't pose a challenge. Mirio grinned and encouraged him to go around with Nijire, suggesting they use their quirks and martial arts, with the first good hit winning. Reluctantly, Izuku agreed, glancing at Nijire, who seemed eager to fight. He backed up a few meters, slipping on his mask and pulling up his hood, allowing wisps of smoke to escape. Mirio and Tamaki leaned against the wall beside Aizawa, watching intently. When the match began, Nijire launched into the air, golden spirals whirling from her hands and feet as she zoomed toward Izuku. He allowed her to get closer before pushing out a large cloud of smoke, filling the room. Nijire stopped and put her hands together, creating a shockwave that blew the smoke away. Izuku jumped from platform to platform, sailing through the air toward her. As Nijire zoomed forward with her hands outstretched, Izuku quickly gathered the smoke around him, creating strong walls to shield himself. The shockwave shattered the first shield but dissipated upon hitting the second. He then propelled himself toward Nijire, who was charging up another shot. Unfortunately for her, Izuku was quicker. His fist met her midsection, the smoky gauntlet covering his hand dampening the blow slightly, but it still sent her spiraling away through the air. Mirio declared Izuku the winner, and Nijire floated down with a smile, while Izuku landed beside her with a bemused expression. Mirio approached, clapping Izuku on the shoulder and praising him for keeping up with them despite being of first year. He explained that they had all struggled in their first years to control their quirks, while Izuku had been Aizawa's personal student for almost a month, which had helped him catch up. Izuku nodded, realizing they shared similar struggles and had worked hard to reach their current levels. Mirio asked if he was in for more training, and Izuku agreed, requesting to be called by his first name. Mirio's smile matched Izuku's, and Nijire bounced with excitement while Tamaki cracked a small smile. With enthusiasm, Mirio declared it was time to get started, striking a heroic pose as he sank into the ground. Izuku entered practice facility A, greeting Tamaki, who was near the entrance. He asked if Mirio had arrived yet, dodging a wave from Nijire and creating a smokescreen. Tamaki hesitated before replying that Mirio was not there yet. Nijire dodged a smoke bomb and launched a small energy blast at Izuku, which he blocked with a weak shield. He quickly set up a staggered, triple-layer shield between himself and Mirio, who was trying to spring up behind him, and then launched a solid wall at the floating spiral girl. Mirio launched an attack from the front, landing a glancing blow on Izuku's outstretched arm. In response, Izuku created a sturdy barrier between them, leaving himself vulnerable to a 15% Nijire blast from above. The shockwave struck Izuku in the back, propelling him forward into Tamaki's reach. Giant red tentacles reached out, but they were swiftly severed by a series of monomolecular blades, allowing Izuku to use a smoke bomb to propel himself into the air and regain his orientation. Nijire soared upwards to meet him, while Mirio sank into the ground and ejected himself into the air at high speed. Tamaki prepared his wings and clamshells, and Izuku stood on a platform high above them, a cigarette in his mouth and dark smoke swirling around him, the mass increasing by the second. Aizawa called for them to stop the spar, instructing all of them to come down. Nijire floated down, and Izuku caught Mirio with a platform, lowering both of them to the ground. Tamaki returned to his normal human form and approached Aizawa. The four of them gathered around the instructor, who held several slips of paper. Aizawa informed them that their exams were scheduled for the next day. He explained that the summer training camp would take place for 1 week during the summer holidays, which he hoped they would all attend. He specified that Togata and Amajiki were to be at Battleground 5 for their exam, while Midoriya and Hadu would report to Battleground. He reminded them to be on time and wear their costumes, as they would receive a briefing upon arrival. Izuku expressed his surprise at taking the same exam as Nijire. Aizawa smiled, noting that the staff believed Izuku was more than capable of handling the second-year exam, stating that the usual first-year exam would be too easy for him. He suggested that Izuku spend the day's session reviewing his super moves in preparation for the following day. Aizawa distributed the slips of paper to each of them before retreating to a corner, pulling out his sleeping bag and climbing into it. Izuku examined the paper, which detailed the time and location of his exam, along with his partner, Nijire. The girl in question gave him an enthusiastic thumbs up, while Mirio congratulated him with a clap on the shoulder. The group spent the next few hours honing their ultimate moves. Nijire developed a low-power, rapid-fire technique that would barrage opponents without causing serious harm. Tamaki worked on a multiple manifestation move called Chimera, mixing and matching various foods. Mirio focused on an ultimate move named Phantom Menace, phasing through solid objects and using the rebound to launch himself into another surface, building speed while unpredictably striking opponents. Izuku practiced a non-lethal offensive move that, if executed correctly, could swiftly end a fight against multiple opponents. He had finally mastered creating simple 3D shapes, which, while not perfect, were consistently sturdy and well-formed as long as he concentrated for a few moments. He and Mirio trained together, with Izuku creating a complex landscape of rooms and corridors while Mirio repeatedly used his super move against him, requiring Izuku to adjust and maintain the landscape while also defending himself. Later, Snipe questioned Aizawa about pairing what he perceived as the weakest 4 students for the end-of-term exams. Aizawa raised an eyebrow, clarifying that he had not paired the weakest students but rather an untouchable powerhouse with a versatile defense, attack, and support. He also paired a maneuverable, battering ram with another versatile powerhouse. Each of them, he noted, could likely take on a third-year student one-on-one and achieve a spectacular victory. Present Mike chimed in, asking why Aizawa had chosen those specific pairings. Aizawa explained that Amajiki was most comfortable around Togata, as they were childhood friends, which would help him excel during the exam. He also noted that Midoriya was the only one who could keep pace with Haru when she became nervous or excited, balancing her gung-ho attitude with his strategic mind. Aizawa smirked, confident that the group would prove their strength. The next day, Izuku arrived at Battleground 6, fully suited and prepared for the challenge ahead. He had filled his suit with smoke and had cigarettes ready at hand if needed. Nijire was already there, holding a piece of paper and beaming at his arrival. She excitedly shared their assignment, which was to defeat and capture all enemies within a time limit, ensuring that their opponents were not seriously harmed and that the city remained undamaged. Points would be deducted for any damage to the villains, the environment, or disruption to civilian life, with a time limit of 30 minutes starting from the buzzer. Izuku acknowledged the challenge, noting that they had no information about the villains' locations, numbers, or identities, which could range from other students to robots or even staff members. Nijire expressed concern that her quirk might inadvertently cause damage in narrow spaces. Izuku reassured her that his quirk was well suited for the situation, allowing him to capture villains without endangering civilians or obstructing traffic, while also protecting buildings during his attacks. Nijire suggested that she scout from above while Izuku followed closely, ready to act when she spotted someone. Izuku confirmed that he could maintain his structures over long distances, making the size of the city manageable. They discussed their strategy, concluding that with a time limit of half an hour, they would likely encounter around 30 villains or fewer. Nijire planned to search the buildings by circling and looking through windows. After a few moments of waiting beside the closed doors, with Izuku smoking and Nijire bouncing nervously, the doors opened and the buzzer rang. Nijire leaped into the air, soaring above the rooftops to begin her search for villains. Izuku followed behind Nijire, peering into the bottom floor windows and around alley corners. Nijire was the first to spot a villain, just 10 seconds into the exercise. She pointed out the glass office building on the north side, 5th floor. Izuku quickly activated a smoke grenade, using several in quick succession alongside stepping stones to reach the office building and circle around to the north side. The robot was partially hidden behind a desk and computer. Izuku let the smoke seep through the gaps between the windows and the frames, surrounding the robot and trapping it in a perfectly cuboid box strong enough to contain a minor strength enhancement quirk. Then, Nijire called out about another villain in the corner shop across the street, in the back room. Izuku nodded to her as they soared above the street filled with self-driving cars, simulating rush hour traffic. Approximately 22 minutes later, Izuku and Nijire landed back at the entrance to the city, where a grinning Aizawa and slack-jawed present Mike awaited them. Aizawa praised their performance, noting they had found and captured all 80 villain bots without causing any damage to them or the buildings, and the traffic hadn't even noticed their presence. He mentioned they still had 7 minutes and 16 seconds left, which would earn them bonus points. Izuku sighed in relief as he released his hold on the 76 smoke prisons around the mock city. Aizawa informed them that Togata and Amajiki were rounding up the last few robots and would finish with a perfect score like them. He advised them to shower, change back into their uniforms, and wait for the other two. As Aizawa walked off, Present Mike followed in a daze, still astonished. Izuku and Nijire headed to the changing rooms and showered. 3 minutes later, Mirio and Tamaki joined Izuku, turning on their showers after greeting him tiredly. Mirio excitedly exclaimed that he and Tamaki had done well, with Mirio scouting inside buildings while Tamaki captured the villains with his quirk. They had to improvise restraints at one point, using bent steel bars and wires. Although they lost points for causing some environmental damage, they regained them by finishing 4 minutes early. Izuku nodded, rinsing soap from his hair, and mentioned that Nijire had scouted for them while he created the prisons. Mirio enthusiastically noted that all the shape training had finally come in handy. Izuku smiled, explaining that while air could still permeate the walls, escaping was difficult. The main challenge had been the sheer number of robots to find and restrain. Tamaki quietly expressed his understanding of the test's difficulty but felt that 80 villains in half an hour was excessive. After leaving the showers and changing into their uniforms, they met Nijire outside and headed up to the main building. Nijire wondered how their classmates had fared, believing that none had failed given their strength. 3 hours later, as Izuku was about to head to lunch, the door burst open, and his 3 friends rushed into the classroom, wide-eyed. Even Tamaki seemed almost manic. Nijire excitedly announced that they had discovered they were the top students in the class. Aizawa opened his eyes, grinning from within his sleeping bag before closing them again. Confused, Izuku asked how they knew. Nijire explained that their classmates had compared scores, revealing that the highest number of captured robots was 23, with no simulated traffic and robots only hiding in alleyways. Mirio added that capturing the faux villains with minimal damage was more of an optional extra credit task for their classmates, not a requirement. Tamaki quietly mentioned that there was a class ranking on the homeroom billboard, and they were at the very top, unlike the end of last year. Izuku beamed at his friends, thrilled by the news. Tamaki revealed he placed 3rd, Nijire 4th, and Mirio proudly stated he came in 2nd. They all achieved a perfect score, but Izuku and Nijire finished with more time to spare, earning extra points, making their scores approximately 120% to the others' 110%. Curious, Izuku asked who came in first. Mirio tilted his head, as if it were an obvious question, while Nijire mirrored his movement, and Tamaki looked confused. Mirio exclaimed that there was only one person it could be Izuku himself, unofficially, of course. Mirio insisted they celebrate Izuku's victory over his upperclassmen, and Izuku invited them over for dinner. His friends readily agreed, and Inko was ecstatic that her son finally had friends over. She didn't tease him about having a girl among them this time but instead asked how he was doing in school, embarrassing him with his baby album. Mirio joked that his dad would do the same if they were at his apartment. Tamaki smiled quietly at the pictures, occasionally asking how Izuku had ended up in certain situations, questions Inko was happy to answer. Nijire quickly bonded with Inko, and they spent most of their time teasing Izuku over his baby pictures or chatting animatedly about his school progress, much to Mirio's delight. Izuku had never been happier. As he nodded to Aizawa while walking to the bus bay with his suitcase in hand, he realized the summer training camp was starting that day. More accurately, it was the 2nd year's training camp, and since Izuku was on his own, there was little point in holding an entire camp just for him. To gain the experience, he would join the 2nd years, who were eager to meet him. Aizawa's expression was grim, which put Izuku on edge. Something felt very wrong. Aizawa explained that he hadn't mentioned it earlier to avoid distracting Izuku from his exam preparations, but now he thought it was a good time to motivate him. His words were light, but his tone remained serious. He informed Izuku that a purple portal had been appearing, accompanied by strange brain creatures that had been abducting people. There had been 4 kidnappings since Izuku's work-study, including Mr. Sakamoto, the man Izuku had saved during their first encounter with the brain creature and portal combination. Izuku had managed to connect several kidnappings from the past to the most recent incidents. Bystanders reported seeing a purple mist in the areas where the kidnappings occurred, a detail consistent enough to link the cases together. Izuku frowned, pondering the implications. He questioned why so many people were being kidnapped and what the perpetrators hoped to gain from it. Aizawa reassured him that the situation was even more troubling. A blood sample found at a scene about 6 months ago did not match the victim, and it was so contaminated that identifying the true culprit was impossible. Izuku was curious about the contamination. Aizawa explained that the sample contained DNA from 3 different individuals, all of whom had gone missing 8, 9, and 13 months before that incident. Though nearly unidentifiable, the quirk factors of those individuals were notable: minor regeneration, minor shock displacement, and reflex. The victim, on the other hand, possessed a powerful strength-enhancing quirk. Izuku's horror deepened as he connected the dots. The creatures involved in the attacks seemed designed to overpower their victims. The one targeting Mr. Sakamoto had a strong strength enhancer, likely derived from the kidnappings Aizawa mentioned. It appeared that someone was collecting and exchanging quirks, creating living weapons tailored to eliminate specific targets or even form an army. After a moment of contemplation, Izuku inquired about the quirks of the most recent victims. Aizawa listed them. Mr. Sakamoto had shock absorption, another had super regeneration, and yet another possessed an impressive speed-enhancing quirk called Burst. The next was a pain dampener, and the one before Sakamoto had a similar quirk known as Impact Recoil. Izuku murmured that they were crafting specialized creatures from the quirks of kidnapping victims, creating formidable opponents. He realized that their next target would likely be stronger than an average civilian. Aizawa confirmed his thoughts, and Izuku speculated that heroes would soon be targeted, as they were the source of some of the strongest quirks. Just then, Nijire called out to them, and Izuku's expression brightened as he turned to his friends. He greeted them cheerfully, and Mirio energetically asked if he was excited for his first training camp. Izuku affirmed his excitement, but Nijire noticed his earlier mood and asked if he was all right. He reassured her that he was fine, explaining that something concerning had come up during his work study but that he would be okay. The group was soon joined by the rest of Class 2A. A girl with close-cropped pink hair approached Izuku, introducing herself as Misa, the class president. She offered her assistance, emphasizing that even though he was an unofficial member, he was more than welcome. Izuku shook hands with several students, many congratulating him on his performance during the exam. Their homeroom teacher ushered them onto the bus, where the 4 friends settled near the front. Mirio had brought a handheld console with multiple wireless controllers, and Izuku used his quirk to levitate the console slightly as they played Superhero Fighters, a game they often enjoyed together. As they played, Tamaki showcased his skills with Fat Gum, while Izuku managed to win a few matches with Gang Orca. Nijire also had her moments of victory with Ryukyu, and Mirio secured a single win with Edge Shot before switching to Best Jeanist and facing defeat. After a few hours of gaming, Izuku scrolled through hero forums on his phone, focusing on a recent incident where All Might had captured 18 villains attempting to rob a bank in Tokyo. A weight settled on his shoulder, pulling his attention away from the screen. Nijire had fallen asleep, leaning against him. A quiet click startled him, and he turned bright red as he noticed Mirio peeking over the back of his chair, phone in hand. Mirio teased him about how cozy they looked together, prompting Izuku to threaten him playfully. The rest of the trip was filled with tension as Nijire snuggled closer, while Mirio continued to chuckle at their situation. Eventually, the bus stopped on a rocky clifftop overlooking a forest, with a mountain rising in the distance. Mirio hopped off the bus, followed by Tamaki, and Izuku tapped Nijire gently to wake her. She groggily lifted her head, asking where they were. Izuku informed her that they had arrived at a rest stop, and she quickly untangled herself, stretching and regaining her usual energy as she jumped off the bus. Izuku joined the other boys near the cliff edge, where Mirio grinned at him, earning a playful punch for his trouble. Nijire, curious about Izuku's flushed face, asked if something had happened while she was asleep. Izuku quickly denied it, but Mirio chimed in with a mischievous affirmation, leaving Nijire confused. Their homeroom teacher instructed them to follow the routine, mentioning that the pussycats were at the lodge and that Pixie Bob was already in position. Izuku watched in shock as the class enthusiastically leaped off the cliff. Mirio called for Izuku to join them, diving off the edge, followed by Tamaki and Nijire, who floated down gracefully. Trusting his friends, Izuku jumped off as well, a cigarette between his teeth, shielding the lighter from the wind with his hands. A series of smoke bombs redirected his descent, allowing him to land safely. The class was already charging into the trees, and Nijire landed beside him as Tamaki descended from the cliff face. Mirio, however, made a dramatic entrance, having ejected himself from the ground in nothing but his boxers. His uniform lay crumpled a few meters away. Mirio explained that an army of earth beasts and various traps stood between them and the mountain. The challenge they faced in their first year was to reach the mountain by lunchtime, a feat no one had accomplished. This year, however, they had an advantage. Izuku noted that Mirio had perfected his quirk control, allowing him to propel himself swiftly to the end. Nijire and Tamaki could fly, and he himself could achieve a form of flight using smoke bombs. Mirio grinned and suggested that they should confront any earth beasts they encountered on their way, while still aiming for lunchtime. Izuku nodded, a small smile forming on his face, and they all sprinted into the trees. Nijire propelled herself with low-power blasts, weaving effortlessly through the trees. Mirio barreled through anything in his path, including the giant earth monsters. Tamaki used his unique abilities to navigate the forest with a combination of running and flying. Izuku initially struggled, as Smoke Bomb was not designed for maneuvering in dense forests. He attempted to bounce from tree to tree, but without something to hold him up, he would simply fall. He realized that his newest ultimate move could be the solution. Although it wasn't fully complete or stable, it could help him lift himself. He gathered smoke around his chest and abdomen, leaning forward to float a meter above the ground, lying on his front atop the unfinished ultimate move. While it would eventually become his strongest shield and sharpest spear, for now, it served as a means of transportation. With newfound speed, Izuku darted through the forest, creating pointed shields before him and smashing through the earth beasts head-on. Mirio caught up to him moments later, darting between the trees with incredible agility. Izuku gave a thumbs up in response to Mirio's excited remarks about his new move, even as he struggled to communicate over the noise of the forest. Mirio grinned, comparing Izuku's appearance to a character from a film they had all watched together. They smashed through another earth beast and were soon joined by Nijire and Tamaki. Nijire noted that Tamaki had needed a moment to adjust to running in the forest. She exclaimed how cool Izuku looked, causing him to blush and pull the smoke up to hide his face. As they continued, only Izuku's bright green eyes were visible in the swirling smoke, glowing in the dark fog as they maneuvered skillfully through the trees and earth beasts. The group tore through the forest, ensuring that no earth beast they encountered lasted more than a few moments. They arrived at the lodge just before 1 o'clock, slightly dirty from the earth but only a little out of breath. Maintaining Dark Cloak was challenging, but it was easier than creating shields had been. Nijire had an incredible amount of stamina, using very little energy to zip between the trees. Mirio's quirk didn't tire him out, and he was only winded from insisting on running the last stretch. Tamaki was the most exhausted, but thanks to their training he managed better than expected. Mandalay and Ragdoll of the Wild Pussycats awaited them as they emerged from the trees, while Mr. Aizawa leaned against the wall of the main building, a smirk on his face. Mirio asked if they were on time for lunch as he put on the uniform that Tamaki had carried for him. The summer training camp was intense. The purpose of the camp was to dedicate a week to quirk training, with each student's training tailored to their needs. Tamaki had to eat and manifest as many foods as possible almost continuously, often feeling ill. The more manifestations he could use at once, the more options he would have in battle. Mirio focused on improving his lung capacity and fine control over his quirk, learning to hold his breath longer to stay permeable. Nijire engaged in intense stamina training, running around the camp until she dropped, only to recover and continue. The more stamina she had, the longer she could use her quirk at higher outputs. Izuku's training centered on technique rather than sheer output. He already controlled a significant amount of smoke, but he needed to fine-tune his control, working on separate masses of smoke and perfecting dark cloak. On the third day of training, Izawa challenged Izuku, breaking his concentration and causing his smoky shapes to become wispy. He received a bruise for his troubles. Izawa emphasized the need for Izuku to maintain control over his quirk in a fight, pushing him to his physical limits while he pushed his quirk beyond its own. They engaged in hand-to-hand combat for hours, with Izuku maintaining multiple individual shapes, solidifying and unsolidifying them repeatedly without dropping any. On the seventh and final day of camp, everyone was assigned a task to complete. What would have been difficult or impossible for the students before was now achievable with minimal effort. Nijire needed to execute 10 consecutive 100% attacks, managing 13 before feeling fatigued. Tamaki had to manifest 5 different foods at once to overcome an earthy obstacle course. He used 6 and completed the task in under a minute. Mirio hadn't really improved his quirk. Instead, he had enhanced his ability to use it effectively. He could hold his breath for a full minute before nearly passing out. Izuku needed to create a life-sized replica of Izawa with considerable detail. He even gave the smoky clone individual eyelashes. Upon reflection, he realized that most objects could be constructed by combining and resizing the 3 basic shapes he had mastered. After that, creating with smoke became easy. The smoke Izawa was a bit more fragile than he would have preferred, but it would have taken a strong quirk to break it. His friends applauded the creation, recognizing its significance as yet another milestone Izuku had surpassed. Izawa raised an eyebrow at the detailed replica of himself. The skin was even the same shade as his own. The capture weapon was a wispy white, while the jumpsuit and his hair remained black. The bright yellow goggles around the clone's neck were barely visible. Although it was clearly made of smoke and just a replica, it was well-crafted nonetheless. Once every student had showcased their improvements, they were given time to visit the hot springs, explore the forest, or do whatever they liked before the buses returned them to the UA campus. Izuku, Mirio, and Tamaki relaxed in the hot springs, while Nijire decided to grab a bite to regain some of her energy. The men's side was completely empty except for the 3 friends, which Mirio decided to take advantage of. Mirio, with a small grin spreading across his face, asked Izuku if there was a particular reason he had been avoiding Nijire all week. Izuku sank deeper into the water. He mentioned that they had been training hard, especially under Eraserhead's rigorous guidance, dodging the question. Mirio raised an eyebrow sarcastically, teasing Izuku about whether he had a crush on their female friend. Izuku sank even further, unable to meet Mirio's gaze, his head the only part of him above the waterline. He mumbled a denial. Mirio laughed, and Tamaki chuckled quietly, prompting Izuku to turn away from them in irritation. Mirio continued to tease, claiming that Izuku had convinced them all of his feelings. Izuku retorted, expressing his frustration with Mirio's immaturity and calling him a traitor for confirming his suspicions. Mirio reassured Izuku that he was just joking and that he didn't need to feel embarrassed. They were friends after all. He even suggested that Izuku and Nijire would make an adorable pair. Tamaki, usually timid, nodded slowly with a small smile, which made Izuku sigh in defeat. Mirio insisted that they would tease him but would never abandon him for it. Izuku expressed his concern about Nijire finding out and thinking he was strange. Tamaki let out a snort, and Mirio laughed, assuring Izuku that before anything else, she was his friend. Mirio continued, asking Izuku to consider how he would feel if Mirio told him he had feelings for him. Izuku shook his head, stating that even if he didn't feel the same way, Mirio would still be his friend. Mirio grinned, reinforcing that even if Nijire didn't feel the same, it wouldn't change their friendship. He suggested that in a few years, they could laugh about it during a movie night. Izuku nodded, realizing that Nijire was not the type to abandon friends over something trivial. Mirio encouraged Izuku to tell her how he felt. Izuku protested, claiming it was a terrible idea, one of the worst he had ever heard. Mirio shrugged, stating that he believed it would be best if Izuku did. The trio fell silent for the rest of their time in the springs, with Mirio occasionally shooting meaningful glances at Izuku, which were pointedly ignored. Eventually, they packed their things and met up with Nijire for dinner before the bus ride home. Mirio and Tamaki sat in front of Izuku and Nijire, with Mirio grinning and wiggling his eyebrows at Izuku, who glared back at him. Most people fell asleep within the first hour. Nijire leaned against Izuku during the second hour, and he dozed off during the third, despite his embarrassment from Mirio's teasing. Izuku woke up to a blur of blue. He blinked groggily, trying to clear his vision. It became apparent that it was a head of hair, a nice shade of blue, his favorite color. He couldn't recall when blue became his favorite, but it just had. His entire right side was warm, with something resting on his shoulder and wrapped around his right arm. Whatever he was leaning against was quite comfortable. As his groggy brain struggled to remember where he had been before falling asleep, he realized they had left on the bus after dinner. He turned slightly and came face to face with Mirio, who was wiggling his eyebrows. This irritated Izuku for some reason. Mirio asked if he was comfortable and reminded him that they were back at UA, suggesting he wake Nijire up. It took Inko a day to figure it out. During dinner, she asked Izuku about the girl or boy he liked. Izuku nearly spat out his katsudon, surprised by her question. Inko giggled, claiming it was written all over his face and that, as his mother, she could tell these things. She pressed him for details, and Izuku lamented that he already faced enough teasing from Mirio, with even Tamaki occasionally joining in. Izuku grumbled childishly as he picked at his dinner, feeling embarrassed. Inko smiled as she asked if Nijire was aware of the secret. Izuku froze, and Inko's smile widened as she expressed her approval, which made Izuku exclaim in surprise. Later, Izuku slumped down onto the bench beside Mirio, who was already waiting. He could see Nijire and Tamaki walking across the park to join them. Izuku shared that his mother had figured out the secret in just a day. Mirio shrugged with a smile, commenting on how parents often had a knack for these things. He mused that their parents would likely get along famously if they ever met, to which Izuku quickly agreed that it was best to avoid that scenario. Nijire and Tamaki joined them on the bench, and Mirio's eyebrows raised playfully as Izuku's face turned red. Nijire eagerly asked where they were going, wondering if it would be fun and if there would be food. Mirio dramatically announced that they were headed to the arcade. It was clear why he chose this location, as many of the games were older versions of the fighting games they enjoyed on his console. However, Izuku was still banned from using All Might in any of the games there. After lunch, they wandered around Muzutafu, where they were recognized from the sports festival, much to Izuku's embarrassment. The group spent most of the summer exploring new places together. Occasionally, one of them would have family commitments or other plans, leading to their quartet sometimes becoming a trio or duo. Mirio often concocted vague plans, leaving Izuku and Nijire to hang out alone, which made Izuku a nervous wreck most of the time. The day before school resumed, Mirio set up a final outing. He entered the almost deserted park and spotted Izuku's bushy green hair resting on a picnic table. He sat beside him and rested his chin on his palm, checking in on his friend. Izuku replied that he was fine, but Mirio playfully probed if he had confessed his feelings and been rejected. Izuku clarified that it was not the case. In fact, Nijire had kissed him on the cheek and then skipped away, leaving him stunned. Mirio understood Izuku's feelings and suggested that they might not be officially together yet, but it could happen soon. Izuku admitted he felt foolish, but Mirio reassured him that it was a normal feeling. They sat in silence for a few moments before Mirio asked if Izuku planned to go home soon. Izuku replied that he probably should, but Mirio invited him over to play Smash Heroes, which he gladly accepted. They played for hours, with Izuku dominating the game using All Might. After defeating the final boss, Izuku sat staring at the screen, realizing something significant. Mirio teased him about whether he would go scream in joy, but Izuku decided instead to focus on the game while contemplating his feelings. True to his word, he used the weakest hero in the game to take down multiple high-level opponents, even managing to hold his own against All Might. Mirio asked if Izuku had figured out the meaning of life yet, but Izuku replied that he knew what he wanted to do, though he wouldn't share it since Mirio would only try to meddle. Mirio pressed him about when he would tell Nijire, and Izuku mentioned he planned to do so after the licensing exam in 3 weeks. Mirio cautioned him not to wait too long, suggesting that it was more than just a friendly kiss. They fell into silence again, with Mirio struggling to keep up in the game. He asked if they had any ideas for new ultimate moves, and Izuku shared that he had a few simple ideas in mind. Mirio suggested a move that could blind opponents, which sparked an idea for a Star Wars-themed ultimate move. They began to brainstorm, laughing as they made silly impressions of various characters until late into the evening. The next day in class, their homeroom teacher announced that they would be working on ultimate moves. Several teachers were present, including Ectoplasm, Eraserhead, and Cementos. The teacher explained that they could use the facility to create and refine their moves with Cementos's help and that Ectoplasm could assist with his clones if needed. Izuku, Mirio, Tamaki, and Nijire quickly grouped up. Mirio asked what everyone was working on, and Nijire expressed her desire to improve her rapid-fire blasts. Tamaki mentioned he wanted to refine his Chimera mode, while Mirio excitedly announced he would create an entirely new move. Izuku planned to repurpose an old move and refine his Dark Cloak, which was almost perfect but needed some improvements. They each found their designated spaces to begin their work, eager to develop their skills further. Izuku took his position in the middle of the section as Mirio instructed. He waved to Cementos, signaling that he was ready to begin. Moments later, Izuku stood before a cement pillar, focusing intently on the solid smoke gauntlet enveloping his arm. He extended his hand flat, allowing the smoke to reshape itself, flattening and stretching outward. With determination, he declared his new technique, Monomolecular Blade. Izuku swung his arm at the target, effortlessly slicing it in two. His training had paid off. His monomolecular blade was not only truly monomolecular but also much sturdier than before. While he could still use it at a distance, he primarily intended to use it for clearing rubble. The blade was designed like a real sword, encasing his entire hand in smoke, providing both protection and offensive capability. It integrated seamlessly with Dark Cloak, which he planned to refine during the next 2 weeks of training. Izuku formed a second monomolecular gauntlet on his left hand, energetically swiping at the concrete pillar and reducing it to tiny chunks. He turned to his friends, who were captivated by the whirlwind of activity. With a grin, he announced that he was finished and ready to work on his second ultimate move of the day. Mirio, excited by the challenge, responded enthusiastically and turned back to the wall, only to yelp in surprise after punching it. The rest of the day was spent experimenting with Dark Cloak, pushing the limits of what he could achieve with smoke. The following 2 weeks flew by as the group created and mastered new ultimate moves every few days. Just like during their training camp, they showcased their new techniques at the end of the 2 weeks. Mirio demonstrated his move, Blinder Touch Eyeball Crush, with Izuku willingly acting as his test subject, trusting that Mirio would execute it properly. Mirio showcased all 10 of his ultimate moves, honed over 1.5 years at UA. Nijire had a few versatile moves that proved useful in various situations, while Tamaki's entire quirk functioned as an ultimate move in itself, which he demonstrated against an Ectoplasm clone. Finally, as the unofficial member of Class 2A, Izuku presented his own moves: Smoke Bomb, Dark Shield, Wall, Monomolecular Blade, Monomolecular Gauntlet, Smokescreen, Dark Whirlwind, Dark Cloak, Smoke Construct, Dark Tether, Dark Choke, Detroit Shield, and Dark Smash. Most of these were self-explanatory. Dark Shield served as a smaller, sturdier version of Wall, while Dark Tether mimicked Tamaki's tentacles. Dark Smash was a powerful punch enhanced by rapidly moving smoke. Detroit Shield was Izuku's strongest defense, theoretically capable of withstanding a direct hit from a Detroit Smash, one of All Might's most powerful techniques. In practice, it consisted of 12 Dark Shields layered together. It had proven effective, capable of absorbing a full-force Nijire wave and resisting Tamaki's attempts to break through. Class 2A had unleashed their powers and several ultimate moves against it, barely managing to breach the third layer. Nijire expressed her admiration for the tough shield as they walked to the changing rooms. Mirio remarked that while he wasn't sure about its ability to withstand a Detroit Smash, even the top 10 heroes minus All Might would struggle against it. Izuku smiled, feeling a sense of pride. Mirio then suggested that since he had Phantom Menace and Izuku had Dark Choke, they should come. up with a Star Wars-themed ultimate move. Tamaki chuckled quietly, while Nijire laughed out loud, excited by the idea. She proposed they have a refresher on the films, and Mirio eagerly agreed. Izuku, however, flatly stated that they could have a movie night, but he wasn't interested in watching Star Wars again. When asked what he would prefer, he started to mention a new All Might film, but the others quickly rejected the idea. Tamaki suggested Jaws 25, prompting Izuku to point out that Tamaki only liked it because the hero had tentacle powers like him. Nijire chimed in, suggesting a Pixar film, specifically WALL-E, which she claimed was her favorite. Mirio was skeptical, arguing that she said that about all the old Pixar titles. Izuku expressed his willingness to watch it, but Mirio gave him a disappointed look. Izuku defended his choice, explaining that it was a new option and not another Star Wars or Jaws sequel. He argued that many Pixar films were actually quite good, and Tamaki nodded in agreement. Mirio teased that Izuku just wanted to watch Star Wars Episode 0.1, The Ghostly Problem, to which Izuku expressed his exasperation, insisting it was just a spoof. Mirio countered that it was canon. Izuku stepped off the bus, costume case in hand, joining his classmates who were gathered around their homeroom teacher for a final pep talk. They were all preparing for their first attempt at the provisional exam, and Izuku was participating alongside the second years due to his demonstrated skill and power. Approaching Aizawa with a nervous smile, Izuku received reassurance from his teacher, who encouraged him not to stress. Aizawa reminded him that he could always retake the exam next year if needed. With renewed determination, Izuku nodded, and Aizawa raised his fist for a supportive bump. At the start of the year, Aizawa had promised to help Izuku become a great hero, and now, just 2.5 months later, that promise was coming to fruition. As Izuku walked confidently into the main building, Aizawa quietly encouraged him to shine. In the briefing center, Izuku reunited with Mirio, Tamaki, and Nijire, where many hero students were already gathered. Curious about the day's activities, Izuku asked if they had any idea what to expect. Mirio cheerfully replied that they did not know yet. They adjusted their costumes nervously as a tired-looking man approached the podium. He introduced himself as Mara, the representative of the HSPC, and explained that the first half of the exam would be an elimination round. Only half of the participants would be able to pass the first part of the exam. The second part involved a rescue operation, but that would come later. The instructor explained that they would be playing a special version of tag using capture tape. Once 178 students remained uncaptured, the exam would proceed to the second half. Those eliminated would have to try again next time. Each student received 3 rolls of capture tape and could work in groups. They were instructed not to harm their opponents too severely. While there was no requirement to capture anyone, hiding could affect their final scores. After everyone collected their tape, they had 5 minutes to position themselves in the stadium, avoiding the stands and the building itself. As the time began, the walls and ceiling shifted, revealing an arena reminiscent of the USJ, complete with various combat zones. A buzzer sounded, and a countdown appeared on the screen above. The instructor sleepily announced the start of the game. Mirio tossed his capture tape to Izuku and sank into the ground, indicating the mountain zone. Tamaki manifested wings and soared into the air, heading toward the mountains while tucking the tape into one of his many pockets. Nijire burst into the sky with a dazzling explosion of spiraling light, a new move she had created for quick propulsion. Izuku exhaled a breath of smoke, shifting the cigarette in his mouth aside as he activated Dark Cloak, effortlessly catching up to Nijire and Tamaki, reaching the top of the mountain just as Mirio emerged from the ground. The 4 of them gathered together. Mirio began to strategize, noting that they had 12 reels of capture tape and 335 competitors to face. Izuku suggested that he might be able to capture opponents with smoke, pointing out that the instructor hadn't specified that they needed to use the tape. Mirio assigned roles. He would be the distraction, Tamaki would capture, Nijire would defend and intimidate, and Izuku would test his smoke capture idea. If it worked, he would pass his tape to Nijire and join Tamaki in the capture team, as he was less vulnerable in his smoke form. The 3 nodded in agreement, with Tamaki taking the capture tape and demanifesting his wings. He sprinted across the rocky outcrop toward the only path up the mountain, while Nijire hovered just behind him, scanning for other groups. Mirio had sunk into the floor to lead other teams to them. As the buzzer rang out, the game of tag began. Aizawa observed with pride as his star student excelled in the competition. He watched Izuku skillfully navigate through enemies, concealed within the swirling smoke and shields as he wrapped them in dark tether, eliminating them one by one. Aizawa mused that Izuku could probably take on All Might and make a significant impact at this point. After another month, who knew what would happen? The current #1 hero would need to be ready to defend his title against a 15-year-old. Aizawa chuckled as he watched Izuku backflip over a student wielding an ice quirk, wrapping a dark tether around the student's waist. The student appeared confused when his hero name was announced as eliminated. Aizawa continued to smile to himself, causing concern for Miss Joke, who sat beside him. She had fallen silent, staring at him in horror, wondering if something terrible had happened. Aizawa simply pointed down at the swirling mass of smoke, where Izuku stood at the center, eliminating multiple students simultaneously. He raised his smoky hands into the air, expanding the storm and engulfing even more participants. Izuku's laughter echoed through the arena, reminiscent of a certain underground hero. Aizawa proudly declared that Izuku was his student. As the buzzer sounded, Izuku looked up. The instructor announced that all 178 remaining participants should return to the central area. Those who had been captured but had not yet left the arena were instructed to enter the building, where they would be guided to their next destination. Once Mirio, Tamaki, and Nijire rejoined Izuku in the open central building, the instructor began to speak. He congratulated them on passing the first half of the exam, clarifying that it was merely the elimination round. The real test was about to begin. Suddenly, explosions engulfed the model cities to the north, east, south, and west, causing them to collapse. The instructor explained that bombings had occurred in 4 nearby cities, and their task was to rescue civilians and salvage whatever remained. The HUC would act as injured civilians in this scenario, and they were urged to take the situation seriously. They had approximately 3 minutes to prepare. Mirio was the de facto leader during evasion and infiltration scenarios, while Tamaki led during combat, still building his confidence. Izuku, with his analytical mind and quirk, was the leader during rescue scenarios. He quickly assigned roles. Mirio would scout the city to the north, locating civilians and coordinating with heroes suited for rescue. Tamaki would go east to lift rubble and support standing buildings while carrying civilians to safety. Nijire was tasked with scouting from above in the west, while Izuku would take the south. He instructed them to communicate through the comms if anyone needed assistance. As soon as Izuku finished giving orders, the buzzer sounded, and they sprang into action. Mirio dropped into the ground, Tamaki bounded away, Nijire flew, and Izuku leaped toward their designated areas. Izuku raced ahead of the other hero students using Dark Cloak, reaching the city and immediately spreading his smoke over the area. He quickly identified civilians trapped in the rubble around him. The smoke solidified around the victims, rising and pushing the debris aside to free them. Izuku gathered all 19 people and smiled at their shocked faces. He reassured them that the heroes were there to help and gently asked if anyone knew of family members or others who were nearby during the explosion. A small HUC worker pointed behind them, expressing concern for his father, who had been right beside him when the explosion occurred. Izuku nodded and offered a small smile, assuring him that his father would be fine and that other heroes would find him while he took the civilians to the medical center. He then turned to the odd students behind him and instructed them to check a small corner shop a few streets over, where they might find a man. With that, Izuku took to the air, flying back to the center of the arena with the 19 rescued civilians in tow. Upon arriving at the makeshift medical tent, he reported that there were no serious injuries except for one lady with a broken leg, which he had stabilized with his smoke but would need to be properly set. Although none of the workers were injured, it was standard procedure to inquire about any injuries. The HUC worker had described her leg as stinging. As he exited the tent, his earpiece crackled to life. Nijire's voice came through urgently, informing him of an unstable building with no support except for one kid with a minor stasis quirk. Everyone else present was an offensive-type emitter. Izuku responded that he was on his way and asked Lemillion and Sun Eater if they had encountered any problems. Lemillion reported that everything was fine, while Sun Eater mentioned that a few people had been unsettled by his quietness, but it was all sorted now. Izuku sarcastically noted the glowing building that was crumbling in slow motion and arrived on the scene, immediately cocooning the structure in smoke. The smoke hardened within the cracks, stabilizing the apartment complex. He took a long pull from his cigarette and blew the smoke away from the building, revealing a pale concrete tower marked with black lines. He assessed that the building was stable and noted the civilians trapped on the second, third, and fifth floors. The other examinees quickly got to work as Mirio emerged from the ground, slightly out of breath. He expressed relief that everything was under control. Sun Eater requested help transporting civilians, and Izuku assured him that the building would hold even in his absence, instructing him to call if needed before floating into the air and zooming away. Mirio waved goodbye, then turned to Nijire, doing a double take and smiling as he noticed she was drooling. Izuku had just sat down at the medical tent when an explosion erupted in the city to the north. Mirio's voice came through again, alerting him to the presence of villains, specifically Ryukyu and her sidekicks. He confirmed that all civilians had been evacuated but questioned why they were attacking now. Izuku explained that this was the second half of the exam, where the villains were directly attacking rather than using bombs. He instructed Sun Eater and Nijire to keep an eye out for villains in their areas and informed a student overseeing the medical area that they would need a villain detainment zone, as Ryukyu and her sidekicks were causing chaos in the northern city. As he soared into the sky again, Izuku anticipated the villains crawling across the city, led by Gang Orca. He wondered if All Might or Best Jeanist would show up next. Tamaki's voice then reported that Best Jeanist and his sidekicks were in the city, but they had managed to evacuate all civilians. Izuku asked Nijire if All Might had appeared in her area, to which she replied that it was worse Endeavor was present, setting fire to the remaining buildings. She explained that he had a few sidekicks handling the students, but they were outnumbered. Izuku stopped in the air above Gang Orca and his sidekicks, promising to deal with the fire problem after taking out Gang Orca first. Upon arriving at City W, Izuku checked in with his teammates, confirming their statuses. They were all managing to hold their ground against the villains, but the fires were becoming a nuisance. Izuku raised his hand, gesturing to the thick smoke billowing from the flames. The smoke moved downward, smothering the fires and extinguishing them. A column of flame erupted nearby as Endeavor's sidekicks engaged in battle, creating a surprisingly even fight. Endeavor himself was launching flames into the sky, attempting to hit Nijire and another student who were buzzing around him. Nijire was using her quirk to blast him, while the other student was throwing rubble, which melted as it approached. Izuku announced his arrival, hovering beside Nijire and stating that the fires had been put out. He emphasized the need to subdue Endeavor, as he would continue to burn the city otherwise. Izuku noted that the objective couldn't just be to defeat the villains, as they were among the top heroes in the country, suggesting there might be a time limit. As he attempted to wrap Endeavor in smoke, the hero dodged and retaliated with more fire. Izuku found Endeavor's ability to hover frustrating, as it disrupted his tactics. Just then, Mirio arrived, shouting energetically, followed by Tamaki, who was visibly exhausted. Mirio reported that the sidekicks had been dealt with and that they were now tackling Ryukyu. Tamaki added that Best Jeanist had underestimated the number of students who escaped and had been overwhelmed, though he had handled it graciously. With only Endeavor remaining, they prepared to confront him, knowing that his ability to fly low and slow would be advantageous for dodging attacks. His fire prevented them from approaching, both from the air and on foot, melting through anything the other students attempted to throw at him, Izuku informed them. Mirio declared he would go below, while Tamaki nodded, saying he would approach from behind. Nijire excitedly announced her intention to go high. Izuku grinned, stating he would be the distraction in the front. The big 3.5 moved into action. Endeavor didn't stand a chance. Izuku sent a picture of his license to his mother and received several crying emojis in response. He left the building and walked back to the bus, immediately being tackled by a giant blue blur. The bouncy periwinkle girl exclaimed with joy that they had done it. Mirio pulled Tamaki into a group hug, and the 3 older students began jumping around, chanting their victory. Eventually, they let the embarrassed Greenette go. Aizawa ruffled his hair as he passed, offering him a small grin. Everyone piled onto the bus, chattering excitedly as they drove back to U. Every second-year student had obtained their licenses this year, much to their elation. Nijire rambled from her seat beside Izuku about all the things she could now do with her quirk to help others in public, while he listened fondly. The bus quickly reached the UA main campus, allowing all the students now heroes to disembark. They may only have provisional licenses, but they were heroes now. Principal Nizu welcomed the number 1 hero, expressing gratitude for the meeting on such short notice. All Might explained that his time was running short and that he needed to find a successor before One for All faded within him. Nizu acknowledged that UA was the perfect environment to train a new symbol of peace and inquired if All Might had anyone in mind. All Might replied that he did not yet have a candidate but was open to Nizu's recommendations. Nizu smiled and began typing on his laptop. He noted that the 3rd years were out of the equation, being too close to graduation, and mentioned that while there were a couple of 2nd years who could do well, 1 first-year student stood out above the rest. He asked if All Might had seen the sports festival that year. All Might regretted that he had been busy with a bank robbery and missed it. Nizu revealed that he had in mind Izuku Midoriya, a first-year who had already surpassed some 2nd years and possibly a few 3rd years. All Might leaned back thoughtfully and inquired about Midoriya's quirk. Nizu's smile widened as he explained that Midoriya had a weak quirk, smoke control, while another student he wanted to recommend, Mr. Togata, had permeation, which was also considered weak. All Might expressed curiosity about their weaknesses, noting that they seemed useful for hero work. Nizu turned the screen to face All Might, displaying videos of the 2 boys. One showed a small green-haired child with a small ball of smoke hovering above his palm, while the other depicted a blonde boy phasing through the floor and struggling to control his quirk. Nizu explained that doctors believed neither boy would gain much better control over their quirks. Midoriya might gain a slightly larger controllable area, but only marginally. All Might observed the boys trying to use their quirks on screen. Nizu continued, revealing that both boys were at the top of their class despite their struggles. He encouraged All Might to press a key to see more. A new pair of videos appeared, showcasing the blonde boy, now a teenager, in a colorful costume, effortlessly taking down several adults in seconds. All Might was impressed by the speed and skill displayed. The next video featured the green-haired boy, now older and in a dark hero costume, surrounded by a vortex of smoke, hovering above Gang Orca and his sidekicks. All Might watched in awe as the sidekicks were swiftly eliminated, leaving the boy to face off against a top 10 pro hero in what was barely a fight. The clip ended, and Nizu explained that both videos were from the licensing exam, highlighting how Midoriya had taken down Gang Orca and his sidekicks almost instantaneously. Afterward, Midoriya teamed up with Togata and others to take down Endeavor in under 5 minutes. All Might was shocked by the news, struggling to comprehend that a group of teenagers had defeated Endeavor, the number 2 hero. Nizu informed him that Midoriya was the half in the group because he was a first year. All Might asked about their personalities and goals, to which Nizu suggested he would have to ask them himself the next day. He mentioned that Midoriya was likely gathering the courage to ask Miss Hadu on a date, with their friends following them around town using their new provisional licenses. All Might planned to be there the next day as Toshinori Yagi, a talent scout for his agency, to observe the 1st and 2nd year festivals that evening, still processing the astonishing events he had just learned about. Nizu chuckled as he watched All Might leave his office, turning the monitor back to himself. Tomorrow promised to be an interesting day. Izuku felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. He had asked Nijire if she wanted to spend some time together, just the 2 of them. When she had asked if he meant it as a date, he had said yes, and she had agreed. Now, Izuku was feeling overwhelmed, and Mirio was the one handing him the proverbial shovel. Mirio presented a nice button-up shirt that matched his hair, featuring a subtle checkered pattern of varying shades of green. Izuku acknowledged it with a lackluster response, feeling the weight of his nerves. Tamaki returned, holding a pair of black trousers that complemented the shirt perfectly. It encouraged Izuku to try them on while he went off to find a nice hat. Izuku protested, insisting he didn't need a hat, new shoes, or a bow tie, cutting off Mirio's suggestions before they could even be voiced. Mirio snapped his fingers in frustration, but Izuku reluctantly tried on the clothes in the changing room. To his surprise, they looked good on him. When he stepped out, he held his arms out slightly, raising his eyebrows in a silent plea for approval. Mirio let out a playful whistle, while Tamaki gave him a thumbs up. Izuku felt a mix of embarrassment and gratitude as Mirio patted him on the back, assuring him that he looked fine and that Nijire would appreciate it. Izuku sighed, feeling the weight of his worries. When Tamaki inquired about his mood, Izuku hesitated before admitting that he was concerned about making a fool of himself. He worried that Nijire might be going along with the date idea out of pity. Mirio reassured him that Nijire had been the one to clarify it was a date, and he reminded Izuku of their previous outings where he had been equally awkward. Eventually, they met up near the arcade where their group often hung out. Nijire was already there, wearing a lovely periwinkle blue dress that fell just past her knees. Her bright smile made Izuku's heart race. Izuku complimented her, and as they walked down the street together, Mirio and Tamaki discreetly followed, capturing moments on their phones. They arrived at a small cafe where Izuku led Nijire inside. He ordered tea while she opted for juice. Their conversation flowed quietly, with Nijire remaining calm while Izuku fumbled over his words. After lunch, they returned to the arcade, playing games together. Without Mirio's watchful eye, they both chose All Might as their character, leading to longer matches filled with laughter. Unfortunately, neither of them won anything from the claw machines, both proving to be quite inept at it. As they left the arcade, Nijire took Izuku's hand, walking beside him with a slight blush on her cheeks. Mirio captured every moment from his hidden vantage point, while Tamaki assisted him in maneuvering his phone. They arrived at the park, wandering among the flower beds and enjoying each other's company. Eventually, Nijire sat down on a bench, and Izuku joined her, feeling grateful for the day they had shared. Nijire expressed her enjoyment of the outing, and Izuku echoed her sentiment, though his fidgeting revealed his nervousness. She then confessed that she had wanted to go on a proper date for a while, not like the accidental ones orchestrated by their friends. Izuku felt a rush of warmth at her words. He admitted that he felt the same way, and they both stumbled over their words, apologizing for interrupting each other. Finally, Izuku gathered his courage and confessed that he liked her as more than just a friend. Nijire's eyes lit up as she revealed that she felt the same way, having been trying to find the right moment to say it. They both laughed at how silly they had been, realizing they had been nervous for nothing. As they enjoyed the comfortable silence, Izuku asked if she would like to do this again, to which she enthusiastically agreed. Then, with a blush on her cheeks, Nijire asked if he would be her boyfriend. Izuku's heart soared as he nodded, feeling a sense of happiness wash over him. Later, Izuku smiled at Aizawa as he entered the classroom. Aizawa informed him that there would be no homeroom that day. Instead, he and Mirio were needed in the empty lounge on the second floor for what the principal called a big opportunity. Izuku nodded, standing from his desk and thanking Aizawa before heading out. He met Mirio on the staircase, who was brimming with excitement about the upcoming meeting. Izuku felt a mix of anticipation and curiosity about what awaited them. Izuku stated that it was approved. Mirio's eyes lit up as though he had just come up with an idea, which usually meant trouble. He mentioned that Nijire had asked him to do something, but Izuku interrupted, warning that if Mirio tried to kiss him, he would knock him out and attend the meeting alone. Mirio chuckled to himself and knocked on the lounge door. A rather weak voice called for them to enter. He opened the door and stepped inside, with Izuku following and closing the door behind him. Mirio announced their arrival, introducing themselves as there to meet a mysterious stranger. At one of the low tables sat a skeletal man with slicked-back blonde hair, leaving two long strands drooping in front of his thin face. He wore a mismatched yellow pinstripe suit that hung loosely on his bony frame. Izuku internally nicknamed him Small Might, as he resembled a shrunken version of All Might. The man greeted them, introducing himself as Toshinori Yagi, a talent scout for All Might's agency. Both boys were surprised to learn that All Might was scouting them, or at least his agency was. Yagi explained that he had seen their performances in the sports festivals and licensing exam, expressing his admiration for how they had tamed and improved their quirks. All Might was interested in both of them. As they accepted tea from Mr. Yagi and sat opposite him, Izuku noted that All Might had never done internships before. Yagi smiled and explained that All Might had recently taken an interest in teaching to pass on his knowledge and experience to the next generation of heroes. He emphasized that while they were strong in combat and dedicated to heroics, he wanted to understand what kind of heroes they aspired to be and their future goals. Mirio eagerly offered to answer any questions, and Izuku nodded in agreement. Yagi asked about their inspirations and ultimate goals as heroes. Mirio proudly declared his hero name was Lemillion, stating his ambition to save 1,000,000 people even if he couldn't save them all. Yagi nodded, impressed by the maturity of his ideal. Izuku shared his admiration for All Might, recalling an old video where All Might single-handedly saved 100 people. He confessed to watching it so often that he likely contributed to its view count. His dream was to help people and provide reassurance, just like All Might did. Yagi inquired if they aimed for the #1 spot among heroes. Both teens shook their heads, with Izuku expressing his desire to be the best hero he could be. He noted that high rankings often indicated popularity rather than efficiency, and like Mirio, he simply wanted to excel in his own way. Yagi leaned forward, smiling as he asked if they would trade their quirks for another. Both teens immediately declined, explaining that they had put significant effort into their quirks and had grown attached to them. Mirio mentioned that despite the challenges of training, he appreciated his quirk, while Izuku joked about fantasizing about All Might's strength but still valuing his own abilities. Yagi then posed a final question about their views on villainous quirks, such as mind control or those requiring extreme measures to activate. Mirio suggested that a quirk was just a quirk, and no one could help what they were born with. He playfully noted that Izuku had a fascination with quirks, prompting Izuku to enthusiastically ask about blood quirks and mind control users. Yagi, slightly taken aback by Izuku's barrage of questions, clarified that it was a hypothetical scenario. He then prepared to reveal something important, cautioning them not to freak out. Mirio trailed off, confused, while Izuku stared at the man in disbelief. To their astonishment, All Might himself appeared before them, revealing that Yagi Toshinori was indeed his true name. Izuku stuttered in shock, realizing that All Might had come to scout them personally. All Might explained that he was searching for a successor to carry on his legacy as the symbol of peace when he retired, and he believed one of them was worthy. Both boys sat in stunned silence, processing the weight of All Might's words. He clarified that not only did he deem them worthy of his title, but he also believed one of them could inherit his quirk, which was unique in that it could be passed down. He was the 8th person to wield this power and hoped one of them would become the 9th. Izuku and Mirio exchanged glances, both suggesting that the other should take the quirk. Izuku raised an eyebrow, questioning why he should be the one, as he already possessed significant power. Mirio argued that he was focused on mastering his own quirk and couldn't camouflage super strength like Izuku could. They both complimented each other, with Izuku calling Mirio the nicest guy he knew, while Mirio praised Izuku as the most heroic person he had ever seen. They acknowledged that people would admire Izuku's hero persona more than Mirio's. "You can inspire people." The boys complimented each other, their arms slung over each other's shoulders as they playfully pushed back and forth, much to All Might's amusement. Suddenly, they froze, realizing they were acting like children in front of the legendary hero. Izuku felt a rush of embarrassment, while Mirio, patting Izuku's shoulder, admitted that this was the most embarrassed he had ever been, even more than when his quirk had caused him to appear naked on live television. They turned to All Might, who was shaking with laughter. He assured them that they were both the best choices for the future. The boys released each other and shared a quiet laugh with the hero. Izuku expressed gratitude on behalf of both of them, stating that they appreciated the offer but preferred to continue working hard to achieve their goals. Mirio agreed, adding their shared motto of plus ultra. All Might sighed, acknowledging their determination. He asked if they would consider taking on his quirk if he couldn't find a successor before he grew old. Both boys nodded, promising that if that time came, they would be honored to accept. However, Izuku hoped it wouldn't be for a long time. All Might then returned to his slimmer form and thanked them for meeting with him. He encouraged them to look out for internship offers from Might Tower, expressing his desire to help the next generation of heroes with his experience. The boys smiled at the unexpected opportunity. Once All Might mentioned his quirk, thoughts of internships faded away. Mirio beamed as he thanked All Might, while Izuku expressed his eagerness to accept the offer. All Might reminded them to keep his true form and quirk a secret, as those who knew about One for All were in danger simply by knowing it. They both nodded, determination etched on their faces. As they followed All Might out, they bowed politely as he walked down the corridor. Once he was out of sight, they couldn't contain their excitement. Izuku exclaimed in disbelief that they had just met All Might, shaking Mirio with enthusiasm. Mirio agreed, noting how much cooler All Might was in person. Izuku asked if Mirio would accept the internship offer, to which Mirio replied that he was unsure. He felt that while All Might was the #1 hero, he wasn't as powerful as Izuku or All Might himself. He believed it might be better to learn from an analysis hero to incorporate their fighting style into his own. Izuku nodded, realizing they would have to see how things unfolded. Izuku and Nijire parted ways outside classroom 1A with a hug and a kiss on the cheek. Stepping into the room, he felt a daze of disbelief wash over him, still processing the events that had just occurred. Aizawa walked in and grinned at Izuku. He explained that normally, first years didn't go on internships because they lacked provisional licenses and were rarely scouted by hero agencies. However, Izuku had both. He mentioned that he had received an offer from Might Tower, which he intended to accept. He planned to go underground for his work study and take the limelight for his internship, switching it up for the following year. Aizawa sighed, expressing his wish that it wasn't with All Might. Izuku raised an eyebrow, curious about Aizawa's strong feelings. Aizawa grumbled about All Might spending more time on interviews and merchandise than on his hero duties. He found All Might's laugh annoying and his fashion sense lacking, particularly criticizing his bright yellow suit. Izuku couldn't help but snicker, teasing Aizawa about his apparent disdain for positivity. Aizawa grumpily acknowledged that Izuku had learned something new. Izuku entered Might Tower with a bright smile, having dreamed of this moment since he was 4 years old. He approached the purple-skinned woman at the front desk, introducing himself as Izuku Midoriya, there for his internship. The woman smiled and instructed him to enter the lift to his right, which would take him directly to the 25th floor where All Might awaited him. After thanking the receptionist, Izuku stepped into the large steel lift, waiting patiently as it ascended. The golden doors opened to reveal All Might in his muscular form, striking a dramatic pose reminiscent of a famous athlete. Izuku felt a rush of admiration every time he saw the hero he idolized. All Might welcomed him with enthusiasm, expressing excitement about using his experience to help Izuku on his journey to becoming a great hero. Izuku suggested that All Might could relax and deflate if he wanted, knowing how tiring it must be to maintain that form. All Might obliged, transforming into his secret identity, his hero costume hanging loosely on his now slender frame. He explained that he could only maintain his hero form for about 3 hours a day due to an injury sustained in a battle against a formidable villain 5 years ago. Izuku recognized the name of the villain, recalling the incident that had been kept secret to prevent public panic and maintain faith in the symbol of peace. Izuku nodded in understanding, realizing that All Might was searching for a successor to carry on his legacy when the time came for him to step back. Wisp felt confident that he would find the right path, and even if he didn't, Mirio would be happy to take him under his wing. All Might laughed, placing his hands on his hips and puffing up his chest as he walked toward the lift. He inquired about young Togata's internship. Izuku explained that Mirio had chosen to intern with Sir Night-Eye, believing that a strategy-oriented hero would suit him better than relying solely on brute strength. All Might nodded in approval as the lift reached the ground floor and the doors opened. He remarked that it was a good choice for Mirio to learn under Night Eye and directed Izuku to change into his costume in the room down the corridor. As Wisp and All Might stepped out of the front doors of Might Tower, they were immediately surrounded by reporters. All Might chuckled, asking them to be quick with their questions since they had limited time before heading out. One reporter asked if All Might was taking on another sidekick after Sir Night Eye left to start his own agency. All Might clarified that Wisp was a provisional hero interning under him for the next month to learn about daylight heroics. Another reporter inquired if Wisp planned to focus on the elusive underground. Wisp explained that while he had initially considered underground heroics, he wanted to experience both sides before making a decision. Another reporter asked why All Might had chosen Wisp for his first internship. All Might praised Wisp's impressive performance at the sports festival and his provisional license exam, noting how creatively Wisp utilized his quirk. He expressed his newfound interest in teaching, wanting to pass down his knowledge and experience. When asked how Wisp felt about interning under the #1 hero, Wisp shrugged, stating that it was only his first day and he looked forward to learning from All Might, whom he had admired since childhood. All Might then reminded Wisp that they needed to start their patrol. Wisp nodded, releasing twin clouds of smoke from his mouth guard, which enveloped his legs. The press stepped back, anticipating All Might's powerful jump. All Might grinned at Wisp, challenging him to keep up as he crouched down. Wisp accepted the challenge, and All Might leapt into the sky with a hearty laugh, creating shockwaves as he did. Wisp followed closely, using the dark greaves on his legs to propel himself. As they soared through the sky, All Might began to share his thoughts on heroism while they searched for wrongdoers. Wisp kept pace, leaving trails of black smoke behind him. Meanwhile, a figure watched from a distance, his piercing red gaze fixed on the television. The screen displayed All Might and Wisp, highlighting their impressive teamwork. The figure noted Wisp's simple yet effective costume, which would be easily recognizable if he became famous. He observed the young hero keeping up with All Might, admiring the potential he saw in him. With a grin spreading across his scarred face, he muttered to himself that Wisp was another true hero. The figure turned off the television, picking up his chipped blade, ready to hunt once again. Wisp landed silently on the road, using the smoke to muffle his fall. Dark tendrils lashed out, capturing 5 bank robbers and setting their bags of money aside. The civilians recognized him and expressed their admiration. One of the villains struggled against his restraints, but Wisp calmly informed his superior that he had apprehended the bank robbers and that the police were arriving. All Might praised Wisp's work and instructed him to return to the office once everything was resolved. The police took the villains away, tipping their caps as Wisp nodded in acknowledgement. He waved to the civilians before leaping into the sky, heading back to Might Tower. His time working with All Might had made him a popular hero, and they often split up during patrols to handle different incidents, easing the burden on All Might. Fan-made merchandise featuring Wisp was already appearing online, and he noticed children playing heroes versus villains in parks, using mouthguards similar to his own. Upon arriving at Might Tower, Wisp greeted the media with a polite nod, ignoring their questions as he headed inside. He made his way to the top floor, where he removed his mouthguard and let it hang around his neck. All Might, in his skinnier form, welcomed him from behind his desk. Izuku sat down with a smile, and All Might noted that it was the last day of Wisp's internship until after the school festival, unless he chose to transfer to another agency. Wisp expressed his desire to return in 3 weeks if All Might would have him. All Might laughed, stating that Wisp's presence had been a great help, both in teaching and managing his hero duties, especially the paperwork. Together, they completed the paperwork in half the usual time, much to All Might's relief. Even after just a month, Wisp understood the hero's disdain for paperwork. Yagi and Aizawa were not fond of it, and now neither was Izuku. Izuku stepped off the train and was immediately greeted by a periwinkle missile named Nijire. A blonde figure was not far behind, closely followed by Tamaki. Nijire excitedly asked Izuku about his internship, eager to know how it went, what he learned, and how many villains he had faced. Izuku responded enthusiastically, sharing that he had learned a lot about patrols and paperwork, that All Might was extremely cool, and that he had lost count of the villains he encountered. Mirio, with a grin, patted Izuku on the back and joked about him being the number 1.5 hero. Izuku groaned at the title, expressing his annoyance at being labeled as the half. As they walked, Izuku noticed Mirio's shirt, which featured his masked face. He slumped into Nijire, who was still hugging him tightly while Mirio laughed. Tamaki quietly expressed his discomfort with all the attention, shuddering at the thought. Inko, having watched the reunion, rushed over to hug Izuku, exclaiming how cool he was as a hero. The group eventually made their way to the Midoriya apartment, where Inko had prepared katsudon for everyone. While eating, Izuku mentioned the upcoming school festival and asked for ideas on what their class should do. Nijire excitedly announced her plan to enter the beauty pageant, while Tamaki quietly expressed his reluctance to participate in anything. Mirio suggested a dunk tank featuring hero students, which Izuku sarcastically remarked would be therapeutic. They all laughed before returning to brainstorming ideas. Nijire proposed a stage performance, and Izuku wondered if he would have to do his own thing since he was technically part of Class 1A. Mirio reassured him that he could ask Eraserhead the next day. When Izuku did ask Aizawa, he groaned at the suggestion of doing his own thing. Aizawa shrugged, suggesting a haunted house instead. After some thought, Izuku found it to be a good idea. Over the next week, Izuku used his quirk to create a haunted house made entirely of thick smoke. The walls were black, the ghosts were white, the creatures were gray, and the zombies were green with splashes of red. It was designed for one group at a time, requiring precise control, but it was well constructed, sturdy enough for frightened teenagers. He had Mirio, Nijire, and Tamaki tested out during their breaks from the Dunka Hero construction. Mirio emerged laughing but drenched in sweat, while Nijire was screaming and running for her life. Tamaki, however, remained unfazed, stating that the figures were not real, so they weren't scary. By the end of the second week, everything was ready for the school festival to begin. Izuku jogged over to his designated area, preparing to set up his haunted house. His friends joined him shortly after, and Mirio shared that they had finished the Dunka Hero setup. Nijire mentioned she would join them once the beauty pageant was over, while Tamaki expressed his dread about getting soaked and laughed at. Izuku offered to help him once the haunted house scared everyone away. After a while, the students' families arrived, coming early to see the attractions. Inko was hesitant to enter the haunted house, fearing it would be too overwhelming. Mirio's dad enjoyed dunking him with a basketball, while Tamaki's parents were shy, and Nijire's parents were just as inquisitive as their daughter. As the main gates opened for the public, the four friends split off to their respective events. Izuku had a great time using his smoke constructs to scare UA students and adults alike, taking it easier on younger kids. At one point, Aizawa and present Mike came by to experience the haunted house. Mike emerged looking pale and trembling, while Aizawa grinned at Izuku, giving him a discreet thumbs up for the smoke bugs he had created. As the next group entered, a skeletal man in a yellow pinstripe suit approached, calling out to Izuku. Izuku smiled as he greeted Toshinori, asking what he was doing there. Toshinori explained that he had finished his work for the day and wanted to say hello. Izuku excitedly gestured toward his project, a haunted house he had created using smoke constructs. Toshinori admired the castle-like structure and decided to venture inside. A short while later, Toshinori emerged from the exit, shouting a name as a smoky yellow blur followed him. The name was Gran Torino, an elderly hero who had a reputation for frightening even the symbol of peace. Aizawa often shared amusing stories about All Might's less dignified moments, which Nizu sometimes supplemented with old footage to lighten his mood. Once everyone was warned about the haunted house, Izuku let his construct dissipate and made his way to the dunking booth. He arrived just in time to see Mirio get dunked by a small boy with bright pink hair. Izuku cheered as Mirio fell into the cold water, his surprised shout turning into a gurgle. Himura, the boy responsible, admitted to making the water extra cold, which made Izuku laugh. Mirio resurfaced, exclaiming how cold it was and calling out to Himura. After some time, it was Izuku's turn to sit above the dunk tank, smiling at the eager line of kids ready to throw basketballs. Despite several attempts, he remained dry until the pink-haired boy made a perfect shot, sending Izuku into the freezing water. As the festival continued, Izuku, Mirio, and Tamaki visited the dressing room to wish Nijire good luck in the beauty pageant. She wore an elegant dress that complemented her hair, styled beautifully. Izuku complimented her, and they settled in to watch the pageant, surrounded by other contestants. Izuku thought some of the girls had overdone their makeup and outfits, while Mirio playfully nudged him, teasing him about his thoughts. As Nijire took the stage, Inko and Mirio applauded, and Tamaki offered a shy wave of support. The crowd cheered, and Izuku found himself momentarily speechless, captivated by her presence. Mirio recorded the moment, jokingly asking Izuku for his thoughts on the pageant, which left Izuku flustered and confused. Nijire won the pageant by a significant margin, much to everyone's delight. Meanwhile, Wisp and All Might patrolled the city, soaring through the sky at incredible speeds. Working alongside All Might had greatly improved Wisp's control over his quirk, allowing him to match the pro hero's speed. Although he couldn't generate as much physical force, he could effectively counter it with his Detroit shield. After a powerful Detroit smash from All Might, Wisp remained steady, pushed back but not falling. Wisp's reputation had grown, with many petty thieves surrendering at the sight of him. Actual villains would put up a fight, but most knew it was futile against All Might's apprentice. Soon, Wisp's name would carry the same weight as All Might's. A rumble in the distance signaled a villain attack. All Might declared he would handle it while Wisp kept watch for any distractions. Wisp acknowledged the order and prepared to scout the area. This had become their routine, with one hero addressing the incident while the other remained alert for potential threats. Wisp landed quietly in an alleyway, removing his mouth guard and smiling at a small girl standing before him. He knelt to her level, gently asking her name. Smile reassuring as he noticed her slight trembling. Now that he was closer, he could see the clean bandages wrapped around her arms and legs, and the tattered hospital gown she wore. The little skin visible was dirty, and her silvery white hair was long and matted, tangled behind her head in a messy knot. Izuku introduced himself as a hero and asked if she knew what that meant. The girl nodded, her trembling becoming more subdued. He inquired if she was hurt anywhere and if she had run away from home. The bandages were relatively clean compared to the dirt covering her, suggesting she had either wrapped them herself or was in a situation of neglect or abuse. Again, the girl nodded, this time with less hesitation. He offered to take her with him when a voice interrupted. A man with close-cropped brown hair and shining golden eyes approached, his face partially obscured by a long beak-like mask. He wore a green jacket with purple fur trim around the collar and white surgical gloves on each hand. The girl, identified as Eri, rushed to Izuku, gripping the front of his costume tightly and trembling even more. She pleaded not to be sent back, and Izuku frowned slightly before addressing the newcomer. He asked if he knew the girl, forcing a pleasant smile. The man confirmed he was her father, Kai Chisaki, and apologized for any trouble she had caused. Izuku placed a comforting hand on Eri's head, patting her softly. To his surprise, he noticed a small horn on her right temple, hidden beneath her tangled hair. He expressed his willingness to help but felt compelled to ask about her bandages. Chisaki introduced himself and dismissed the concern, implying that children could be clumsy and things could get rough when they played hero. Izuku chuckled, recalling his own childhood experiences, but the humor felt misplaced. He stood up, holding Eri securely in his arms. Chisaki insisted on taking his daughter back, but Izuku refused, smiling at the man. Chisaki's demeanor shifted, and his eyes narrowed as he removed his glove completely. Izuku sensed a shift in the atmosphere when a crash echoed through the alleyway. He exclaimed that someone was there, a grin spreading across his face. Chisaki turned pale and spun around, only to find an upturned dustbin with a small cloud of smoke drifting beside it. The smoke began to take shape. Chisaki felt something grip his ankles, holding him in place. A thin layer of dark smoke swirled around his feet. By the time he managed to free himself, Izuku and Eri had already vanished. Izuku soared above the city, the little girl cradled against his chest as he activated his comms. He reported an incident involving a girl covered in dirt and bandages, stating he was en route to the nearest hospital. The response was affirmative, and he was assured that assistance would meet him there. Upon arriving at the hospital, he was guided to a small room with a single bed. Eri resisted the doctor's attempts to help, so Izuku carefully unwound the bandages from her limbs while the medical staff observed. He felt a scowl form as he uncovered her arm, revealing numerous wounds, both old and new. Most were puncture wounds, with a few surgical scars crisscrossing her forearm. Her other arm and both legs bore similar signs of distress. One doctor used his quirk to disinfect the most recent injuries while another healed them. They could do little for the older scars, and soon most of the healers left the room. A nurse informed Izuku that Eri would need to stay in the hospital for observation and that he would need to remain with her to ensure her treatments went smoothly. Izuku nodded, lifting Eri in his arms as he stood. He mentioned that someone would soon arrive to take a report from him. The nurse left, leaving Izuku and Eri alone. He carried her into the adjoining bathroom and set her down on the closed toilet seat. Turning to the bathtub, he filled it slowly with warm water and added a generous amount of pink liquid from a bottle on the rim. Eri watched the bubbles fill the bath, and Izuku gently removed her ragged hospital gown, lifting her into the bubbly water. He picked up another bottle and poured a generous amount onto her tangled hair, working his fingers through the messy locks as he lathered the shampoo before rinsing it out. He repeated this process 3 or 4 times to ensure her hair was thoroughly clean, then grabbed a flannel, soaked it in water, and gently wiped her face. Izuku smiled when he pulled the washcloth away, jokingly remarking that there was a little girl hiding under all that dirt, which earned the faintest hint of a smile from Eri. Once the tiny girl was all cleaned up, Izuku lifted her and set her on the bath mat. He took a fluffy towel and playfully tossed it over her head, drying her long hair with enthusiasm. Soft giggles escaped from beneath the towel until he pulled it back, revealing her beaming face. He playfully stuck his tongue out at her, then picked up the bundled-up child and carried her into the main room, setting her down on the hospital bed. Izuku held up a new hospital gown over Eri's head and let her wriggle into it. He exclaimed that she was all cleaned up, tossing the towel aside and spinning around with Eri in his arms. After setting the silver-haired girl down, he combed his fingers through her hair, straightening and untangling it slightly. A quiet knock at the door made Izuku smile. He whispered to Eri that it was probably his boss and assured her he would be right back. Eri held onto his costume, gazing up at him with wide crimson eyes, asking if he promised. Izuku thought for a moment before reaching up and tugging his mouth guard away from his neck, handing it to Eri. He told her to hold it for him, explaining that it was the most important part of his costume, and he would definitely return. Eri nodded, clutching the piece of equipment like a beloved toy, her eyes never leaving him. Izuku walked over to the door, opened it, and smiled at her, promising he would only be gone for 5 minutes. Toshinori Yagi was an optimistic man, and even in his weakened form, his smile rarely faded. He always tried to see the best in everyone, including the villains he faced, and seldom lost his temper. But at that moment, Toshinori was furious. How could someone hurt a little girl in such a way, especially in the city he patrolled? What kind of despicable person would do that? He promised Izuku that if he ever found the man responsible, the fury of All Might would be on his side. Izuku nodded, explaining that the villain had a touch-based quirk, possibly some form of matter manipulation, as he seemed comfortable fighting at a distance. The only reason he hadn't apprehended the villain already was that he didn't want to endanger Eri and was unsure how the villain's quirk would interact with his smoke. Toshinori agreed that it was a wise decision to prioritize Eri's safety. He suggested that with only a week left in Izuku's internship, he should focus on looking after Eri and see if she wanted to talk about what had happened. He emphasized that their job was to ensure Eri could live happily from that point forward. Izuku nodded in agreement, and they parted ways, with Izuku returning to the hospital room while Toshinori headed back to Might Tower to begin his investigations. Izuku opened the door and peeked inside. Eri lay on her back, still clutching the steel mouth guard like a lifeline. He smiled, quietly entering and shifting the covers before tucking her in. He then took a seat in one of the uncomfortable chairs beside her bed. After a while, Izuku awoke to a tiny figure climbing into his lap and snuggling against his chest. He opened his eyes to see Eri looking up at him with big red eyes. She apologized for waking him, and he smiled, reassuring her that it was all right and that she could call him Izuku without using honorifics. Eri nodded, resting her head back on his chest as they enjoyed a peaceful moment together, with Izuku gently combing his fingers through her shining silver hair. After a few minutes, he asked if she had slept well, to which she nodded. They sat in silence for a while longer until he checked if she was feeling okay and if any of her cuts still hurt. Eri shook her head, her horn brushing against his collarbone. 15 minutes later, a nurse entered the room, announcing that they were both awake and asking if Eri would be up for another little exam. The rest of the week flew by as Izuku stayed with Eri in the hospital. He was occasionally visited by his supervisor, Yagi. At one point, after Eri felt ready to talk about her experiences, a detective with a truth quirk came to ask her a few questions. Izuku provided a description of Chisaki, confirming that he was the new leader of a Yakuza group known as the Shy Hasaikai. Inko visited on her days off, instantly falling in love with the adorable little girl who clung to her son. Eri quickly warmed up to Inko, likely due to the clear resemblance between her and Izuku. Mirio and Nijire were unable to visit, as Sir Night Eye was a tough taskmaster and Ryukyu was working on the other side of the country. Tamaki didn't visit either, as he didn't want to disturb Eri. The last day of Eri's hospital stay arrived. The little girl, now dressed in a cute red dress, held Izuku's hand as they entered the hospital reception. Inko and Aizawa were waiting for them, with Inko beaming happily while Aizawa smirked. Izuku looked between the cheerful adults with a hint of wariness. His teacher explained that Eri's living situation had been resolved. The little girl's grip tightened around Izuku's hand as Inko knelt down to her. She gently offered Eri the chance to come live with her and Izuku. Eri's eyes brightened with hope, and Izuku stood a little straighter, staring at Aizawa in disbelief. Eri expressed her desire to stay with them, her excitement evident as she launched herself into Inko's arms. Izuku raised his eyebrows at his mentor, who rolled his eyes but acknowledged the adorable child with a gesture. Unfortunately, Izuku had to return to school the very next day. His friends eagerly questioned him about his new little sister, and he shared the pictures Inko had taken during her visits to the hospital. They all quickly fell in love with Eri, vowing to protect her smile at all costs. Exams came and went, internship offers were extended to the next year, and the Elite Four of UA advanced to their respective next years. Izuku was thrilled to be promoted from half to whole. Mirio organized a celebration with the new 3A, where Izuku expressed his gratitude with a mix of punches and hugs. Eri Midoriya was set to start school with the new year, feeling nervous yet excited about making friends, even though she would miss Inko. As the UA entrance exams approached again, the Elite Four were invited to observe and assist the teachers in monitoring the vast model cities. While they couldn't award rescue points, they helped track the points earned by students and noted various accomplishments. A minor incident occurred in Testing Ground D when a girl with brown hair got trapped under some rubble in the path of the zero-pointer. Fortunately, a boy with a speed quirk resolved the situation swiftly. The principal turned away from the monitors to address Izuku, who responded to his inquiry. The principal mentioned that a new staff member would be teaching heroics this year, prompting Aizawa to open his eyes in curiosity. Izuku felt a wave of dread wash over him as the principal suggested he become a teaching assistant for the first-year heroics lessons. He was informed that his homeroom could be merged with theirs, which made him anxious about the prospect. As Izuku walked down the hallway with Mirio and Nijire, who held his hand gently, he noticed Tamaki trying to avoid the attention of other students. Nijire expressed her excitement about the new heroics teacher, while Mirio speculated that they were likely a prominent pro. Tamaki quietly suggested that perhaps the new teacher simply preferred to avoid the spotlight. Arriving at classroom 3A, Izuku confirmed he was still in the 1A room for convenience, though he lamented that they had never done much in homeroom. As he gazed out the window, he spotted Aizawa with a class of 20 students standing nervously before him. Realizing they were about to begin the quirk assessment test, he muttered to himself, almost forgetting about it. Mirio encouraged Izuku to have fun with the first years as he and Tamaki followed Nijire, who gave Izuku a quick kiss before bouncing off with the others. Izuku turned back the way he came, pulling out a cigarette as he walked. Aizawa faced his new class of energetic students, internally cursing Nizu for their chaotic nature. Among the students were the quiet, the cheerful, the stoic, and the loud, including Bakugo Katsuki, who was sure to be a challenge. Aizawa knew he wouldn't get much sleep with that loud presence around. He finally managed to quiet them down and announced that they would be doing a quirk assessment test. When one student asked about orientation, Aizawa reminded them that they had 3 years to become proper heroes and had no time for unnecessary ceremonies. He then turned to Izuku, who had just stepped out, and asked about his furthest ball throw in middle school. Izuku responded with a distance of around 60 meters, despite the murmurs from the students. Aizawa tossed him the ball, instructing him to use his quirk to throw it, as long as he remained within the designated circle. Izuku prepared himself, extinguishing his cigarette and storing it away. He gathered the smoke from his lungs, condensing it into a small ball in his palm. With precision, he lined up his arm and released the ball, causing a burst of awe among the first years as the smoke exploded and dissipated. Aizawa displayed Izuku's score on a tablet, noting it was 30K, which prompted excited chatter among Class 1A as they looked forward to wielding their own quirks in a similar manner. Unfortunately for them, Aizawa was not in a forgiving mood. He made it clear that the upcoming tests would determine the fate of the students. The last student to finish would be considered lacking in potential and would be expelled from the hero course. Aizawa's expression was one of determination, and Izuku shared a similar look, understanding the gravity of the situation. Aizawa turned his attention to Izuku, questioning why he was not with his classmates. Izuku explained that they had all gone to the opening ceremony. Aizawa then mentioned that Mr. Yagi would likely need Izuku's assistance with lesson plans, humorously suggesting that Yagi's carefree nature could lead to trouble. Izuku nodded quickly, acknowledging the urgency, and hurried off to help, playfully calling out in agreement. Moments later, Momo Yayorozu raised her hand, seeking clarification about Izuku. Aizawa responded, explaining that Izuku Midoriya was the only second-year student in the heroics course who had shown any potential, which had saved him from expulsion. Aizawa noticed the look of surprise on Yayorozu's face, which was mirrored by several other students, though Bakugo scowled in response. Aizawa continued, revealing that Izuku was also the unofficial leader of UA's Elite Four, a group of top hero students. This position was often challenged by Togata. He highlighted that Izuku was All Might's personal apprentice and was seen as a strong contender for the #1 hero's position, even among professional heroes. Aizawa concluded by stating that Izuku and Class 1A were the benchmarks for the rest of the students.